Okay, so let's check if the audio is working. Okay, that seems fine. So let me get started here. So, welcome to the stream, everyone. So this is going to be our setup for going through the Yang Chen speculation. Obviously, have the cover here, very nice, but also a document with this is just the description for the book, and then I have my more general notes. Which, if you've seen my previous video on my channel, it's the same notes that I used there because fundamentally, like, they haven't changed all that much. So we'll just be kind of adapting what we see from this with them. But first, there is a few things to cover before we get into Yang Chen. First, a brand new piece of news that I don't think anyone has covered. Now, it might not be super significant, but let me just bring this up here. So then I'll just bring this out a little bit so you can see it clearer. So this book here, listed on Edelweiss here, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Heart of a Hero. Now, it's not by any particularly significant publisher. As you can see here, it's just by Little Brown Books for young readers. It's, I guess, a fancier version of the I Am Ang book, I guess. Just different kind of publisher, but the same idea of a book. So this is coming out in February 2024. 40 pages. It's a hardcover picture book, just under $20. And the description here, as you can see, says, this giftable picture book based on the classic Nickelodeon series will delight longtime fans as well as newcomers who will be drawn into the franchise through the robust new TV and film content that kicks off in 2024. So this is actually really interesting because the book almost doesn't matter, but it almost suggests that this is like as a more up-to-date sort of like press release information. They seem to know potentially what's going on with the dates and stuff like that. So obviously, for the most part, there's nothing too much to say about the book in that we're just expecting it to be I Am Ang kind of 2.0. But if we look into the key selling points down here, there's some interesting stuff. Now, there are some errors, as we'll get into with this. So, in 2024, Netflix will air a star-studded live-action series depicting the Avatar characters as adults. I don't think so. Additionally, Avatar Studios, formed at Nickelodeon in 2021, has announced a massive slate of new all-ages content set during the classic series timeline, the same as our book, that includes one movie and one series each year from 2025 to 2027. So the reason that's interesting to see in an official, basically description for a book, is that the only time that information has come out is from basically Avatar News, which is basically leaked insider information. So I don't really know if we're necessarily meant to take that as being like any sort of confirmation or anything like that. Like, you'd assume, because it's a licensed book, that this has gone through Avatar Studios, because especially me, like behind the scenes, like getting contacted occasionally about certain things, I know that it feels like before they give you anything, the amount of approvals that need to happen. So it feels like there's no way this press release has come out, description has come out, without it passing through the right hands. But I also don't know what the full situation is, because I don't think there's any other note that I can find about this book anywhere. So don't know what to really make of that. Because obviously the error there of like it saying the Netflix show is with it as adults, and then also mentioning like information about Avatar Studios that hasn't been like officially publicly stated. Now we know that there's 3 movies coming, that's official. One of them, the confirmed Aang movie, is coming in October 2025. But the fact that it's the one movie, one series each year from 2025 to 2027, that's all from that kind of like leaked information side of things. So not sure what the deal is there, but otherwise they mention a lot of accurate information. And the other thing about the 2024 is that, as has been mentioned in chat there has been some rumors going around the last few days that I think Avatar News actually said something about this, that like they're making sure they want to get the CG right for the show, which is why it may be delayed. And I think the other leaked information was suggesting that it has been pushed into 2024, which would match up with this, if that means anything. But also, this was, I think, alongside information that suggested that the other Netflix big live action project, One Piece, tested quite badly when they did a test screening for it, with heavy criticism of its CG being a huge reason why it didn't test that well. So I don't know, were those two pieces of information sort of tied together to sort of say that, like, oh, they're doing another pass on the kind of animations CG on Avatar live action because they maybe have a little bit more confidence, or they want that one to succeed a little bit more. So seeing the, I suppose, similar type of show almost do so badly as maybe change their minds about some of this stuff. But I don't really know what specifically to make of this. Hopefully we'll get some looks at this, because it looks like, as you can see there, it mentions like there is an illustrator on this, so it should be like new information as well. But yeah, 2024 book, I suppose it makes sense. We're getting towards the middle of the year. Stuff for next year is going to get announced, and it is beginning to look like, yeah, next year is the year where Avatar Studios is actually going to happen, more so than anything else. So that's all there really is with that. Otherwise, we're just waiting on like other announcements. So there's that. Then this, we have to talk a little bit, I think, before we start with the Yang Chen stuff, about what's been really, really exciting this week in terms of the new stuff, and that is that the Rise of Kyoshi. So it's still novel related, and obviously we're seeing our first sort of visual adaptation officially for the novels, with the Rise of Kyoshi coming to Avatar Generations. So of course we have Heiran here, very, very nice to see the official design for her. We also have Jonzu, whatever way you want to pronounce his name. I will forever, I think, always have to say that when I say his name, because I think initially I was always Jonzu, but then I listened to the audiobook and it was like the other one, and now I have some weird mixed pronunciation. But anyway, we have Tagaka, of course, and there are others. Like I technically could theoretically show you 3 other characters, but I can't. They haven't been shown officially yet, but you'll see them hopefully tomorrow, because obviously the next week of the Earth Month sweepstakes is tomorrow, starting tomorrow. So I'm assuming the images that they show there will probably be the other ones. So just to give you a little bit of a teaser, I have Kelsong, Yoon, and young Kyoshi, basically. Kyoshi without her makeup are the other 3 images I have, along with some images of the Avatar Mansion is the other stuff that I have. So there's that. We got this fantastic shot here for Avatar Generations just yesterday. So basically all the avatars, all the notable avatars except Aang, so the ones that are going to be coming into the game, I guess is the takeaway here. So we're starting, of course, with Kyoshi. I'm going to assume Korra probably is after that, but it'll be interesting to see how Korra is going to be done, because the patch notes for the game seem to suggest that the Kyoshi era won't be done exactly the same way as the current Aang stuff is, and it might just be like a scenario instead of like adventure paths style thing. So I wonder, will Korra just get the full like adventure treatment, and then the other avatars who maybe don't have as large of a story in terms of episode count, they'll be the ones to get the scenario timelines feature. That'd be, I think, my preference for how to do it. But super exciting, of course. So yeah, Kyoshi, Rise of Kyoshi, era Kyoshi. Karuk, Roku looking as we expect. That's probably the wand that you want as well. I go back and forth on, like, is this is this meant to be the Yang Chen from like her as we see her when she say like speaks to Aang, that age Yang Chen? Because I don't think it's meant to be young Yang Chen, but it doesn't quite feel like it's her as old as she is in the Aang stuff that we see. So I don't know. It's an interesting one. But obviously, the expectation for these stuff would be that I think in terms of characters, that we probably will get the sort of quote unquote fully realized version of the character, and also maybe a young version of the character. At least that's what they seem to be doing with Kyoshi. So it still means there's a possibility for different versions of the characters. So super interesting. This was really nice to see for the anniversary as well. Also, Avatar Generations art to see Korra get some kind of love in all of this, because obviously she's not in the game yet, but seeing some nice new art of her is also really cool. And then, of course, the big kind of key art, of course, here with Kyoshi and Rangi, with the Avatar Mansion, Avatar Estate in the background, which is very, very cool to see. Just massive kind of thing here. And because like we haven't had too much to get like crazy excited about in kind of recent years, apart from say the novels, something like this is actually quite big. Now, I have my doubts potentially in a way, like, is the story going to be executed like incredibly well within the game? I'm not really sure about that, but we'll see. Like, there's the option. Like, at the very least, if you've read the novels, just getting the extra visuals from the game is going to be, I think, the main thing overall. So yeah, people pointing out the sort of heart shape here. Of course, if we kind of follow it here, it kind of goes around in and then around here. So they are sort of making the kind of heart shape here. It's kind of interesting. So shipping in the key art, of course, makes complete sense. So that's cool. So yeah, hopefully the stuff, I'll be able to show off more of the art as we go on, because the patch is coming in like 2 days. Like this update is just 2 days away. And all this stuff is coming into the game, which is pretty exciting. Again, I won't go over this again because I already did it in the video. I'll just mention on Instagram, they added this in. I didn't see this on their other social media channels. At the end of the 2-part 14-day login calendar, Rise of Kyoshi 2, you will receive an Avatar Timelines event ticket. With this ticket, you will be guaranteed a 5-star Avatar Timeline hero. So keep in mind, this is the way that you're going to be able to get, and I suppose use in other teams, the characters not from the Aang era, is that you will have to summon them from the timeline summon banner. And so this is the way they're giving you a guaranteed character for participating in the game for 14 days. So that could be quite a while, but at least you're guaranteed to get one of the characters, because obviously it's like a month-long plus event. This is a way to at least guarantee you get someone. And, you know, because the lineup of characters is, you know, basically the main cast of Rise of Kyoshi, it doesn't really feel like there's any dud characters necessarily. Like, sometimes in the game, like, you're a little bit frustrated if you get, like, one of the various, like, Book 1 Zuko's, additional Book 1 Zuko's. That can be a bit frustrating, but you're going to hit something good regardless, I think, with the timeline thing. So that's pretty exciting. I feel for me, probably Kelsong's the one I'm like the most excited for, just in terms of I've seen the art and I think he looks really cool, and I think there's the potential for like just him to play an interesting role as a character within the game. So there is that. Let's see, maybe there will be dud characters like Mui or Saiful. I have to check the press release to see if it mentions anything. I don't think I could even mention it if I could. But I'm assuming if there are dud characters, they wouldn't be 5-star characters necessarily. Whereas like if they're going to give you sort of like Kyoshi era guard or something like that would be a 4-star character, like is roughly the case in the game right now. So there's that. And yeah, I'll do as much coverage as I can on this. I'm planning to do at least one video at launch to cover sort of like, I suppose, press release information, the trailer when it goes up, and as much gameplay as I can record. Hopefully, we'll see exactly kind of how exactly that works. But I am excited for this for sure, because I think even from like just a game perspective, I do think the Kyoshi characters do have the potential to kind of switch things up a little bit, in terms of just different kind of archetypes of characters. Like if Kelsong is perhaps like an offense focused airbender, that would be something, and kind of a nice option to have as well, and so on. Because some nations are represented way more than others in the game, and so on. So that's that. And I think that brings us basically to the Legacy of Yangchen speculation. So, obviously the book is out July 18th, so we're not actually too far away from it ultimately. Especially when you consider like we're probably going to get our first preview chapter probably next month if it follows the thing from the book last year. There'll be probably an audio preview in June, and then the book is out the next month. And considering that also San Diego Comic-Con is in July as well, and should be shortly after the release of this, there's the potential for some big stuff to happen here. So there's that. Some final Kyoshi thoughts in the chat here. Airbender Pain. Yeah, there's not a lot of Airbender characters in the game at the moment. Love the Jonju design. Definitely. Jasa is also released as a Kyoshi era hero. Yep, there's definitely the options to do that sort of stuff. And I suppose it is important to realize that it's not, the update isn't going to be the entire Rise of Kyoshi. It looks like it's just going to be like the first third of the book or so. So there's absolutely still the potential for like the other Flying Opera Company members, because I know we're all waiting to see like Lao Gu's design and stuff like that. Even Wong, I'm interested to see what the official design for like Wong, Kirama, and Lek is, just to see how in depth they go into the cast will be fascinating. And then eventually like Zhu Ping on. And I'm wondering, like, because they haven't introduced any of the special bending abilities yet into the game. Even though if you look at the in-depth description of abilities and stuff like that, it does mention that there is in the game special like debuffs and stuff like that for like metal bending, lightning, and so on. But none of the characters have it so far. So I'm wondering, is there potential for like the Kyoshi era be the first to introduce like a lightning bender? Probably not, but we'll see how it goes. Because there's still no metal bending Toph either. And yep. So yeah, Legacy of Yangchen book is out in just a few months. There's obviously the normal edition. There's the Barnes and Noble edition, but we don't know how much new content is necessarily going to be in that edition. And then there's also the 4-book box set as well, if you want that, and that has an exclusive poster in it. So there is a variety of options to get this, not to mention like the audiobook, audio CD if you want that as well. Let's see, question in the chat: do you like the idea of learning more about Avatar Gun, as he was mentioned shortly in the first Avatar Yang Chen book? Keep up the good content. I'm always like, yes, learn about a new Avatar, absolutely 100%. And this was one of the few additions to learning about avatars we actually got from the first book, The Dawn of Yang Chen. I think I say something about it here. Will we better explore that gift in the new book? Because this is probably one of the criticisms that I think it's a very fair criticism from the first book, was that right at the start they set up, this is what the issue is with Yang Chen, and we never get specifics outside of really this first initial section of the book, right at the start, where they confirm that the first incident is kind of referring to Avatar Gun and kind of what went on there. And sure, I want to know about that character, but I also want to learn about like Salai. There's probably more to learn about Avatar Zito as well, just because it's directly the Avatar before Yang Chen. So we're kind of waiting to see, like, given that she is the Avatar who has the almost always on kind of connection with the past lives, but the theme in a way of the book for her is that she doesn't get much value out of talking to the past lives because because of, I suppose, her experiences in dealing with conflicts in her era. She, she has to do the stuff herself. They can give general advice from their era, but they can't guide her super specifically about what's going on exactly. So I'm wondering, will they kind of pay that off in a way where we get a big moment where a specific Avatar from the past does kind of get through to her a little bit, where like she maybe gets some more meaningful advice from a past Avatar that kind of hits a little bit and kind of brings it sort of full circle of like, Yang Chen doesn't always have to be the character who's like, whenever everyone says consult your past lives, no, they don't have anything to say. She actually, in some cases, can get something out of that. I'm hoping they do a little bit of that, and just a little bit more references, because if they're going to do the whole thing of like, she gets into maybe a crazy situation, but what if one of the past avatars was like afraid of that specific situation and she has sort of a panic attack because of the past avatar connection? Those moments would have been much better if they had kind of clarified, oh, it was this avatar, and here's a rough idea about what happened. That would make it all the more kind of meaningful, rather than just being like, oh, I guess a avatar in the past must have been afraid of tight spaces, that sort of thing. I get it. You don't want to kind of weigh the book down with every second scene with Yang Chen introducing a new avatar that has some sort of a connection or anything like that, but they definitely leant on the side of being, I think, too cautious with it, to the point where people were like, if you just, in like the space of like her going from young Yang Chen to where she is in the book, has already dealt with her gift effectively, apart from like minor teases of things, was it even that important to have in the first place, in a way? So it'll be interesting to see kind of what way they go about tackling this in this book, because they mention specifically like her legacy, facing her avatar hood with the courage it demands. Like, it doesn't necessarily in the description say anything super specific about if this is going to come back up again or not. I feel like a reference or two, I think, would be nice, given that FCE has introduced, like, Salai has now said Avatar Gun. Maybe something a little bit more about those two would be somewhat interesting, especially because Salai is like said to be one of the better avatars. It would be interesting if like that is the avatar she's kind of almost aiming to be in some way. So I don't know, maybe there's the potential where like maybe it's not Zito she has a big moment with, maybe it's Avatar Salai who kind of gets through to her. Who knows? So yeah. Chicey, Shokan followers, learn more about Zito, potentially. Zito's a weird one because obviously, like, everyone sort of has the joke with him that, like, oh, he's the accountant, bureaucrat avatar. Like, what did he specifically deal with outside of what we learned about in Shadow of Kyoshi? Like, was there something else that was going on here? Because of course her view on it is that she views like all avatars as having regrets, and kind of in a way you would say has a relatively negative outlook on the kind of whole situation. But it'll be interesting to see if they manage to turn that around and potentially have a big moment with her predecessor or one of the other ones. more references to the past Avatar. Whole book doesn't need to be about it, yes. Yeah, that's definitely one where it's just like, it would be absolutely disappointing if we come out of this book and there's no mention of like anything else, given that this is something that still impacts her life. So, let's at this point read through the description again for this book, just so we know what we're talking about. So, common enemies make for strange friends is sort of like the tagline overall for the book. This is being the big line separated out in the marketing stuff. Avatar Yang Chen has succeeded in bringing a measure of stability to Bin-Er, but her successes have been limited to a single city. And rumors concerning Unanimity, a weapon capable of total obliteration, have led to increasing tensions among the four nations. Desperate to restore diplomacy, Yang Chen attempts to de-escalate hostilities between heads of state. But in the wake of a brutal assassination and the freeing of Unanimity, Yang Chen is forced to bring Kavik, the trusted former companion whose betrayal crushed her, back into her fold. As the four nations teeter on the brink of conflict and she begins to unravel the power-hungry Zhongdu Chaisi's true agenda, Yang Chen is forced to measure the worth of humanity and how much can be sacrificed in the name of balance. This taut and provocative fourth installment in the Chronicles of the Avatar series follows Avatar Yang Chen as she charts her legacy, finally making peace with her choices and facing Avatarhood with the courage it demands. So, a lot going on here because, of course, much more so than with the two Kyoshi books, Legacy is a absolute direct sequel. It is a part 2 to the part 1 that was Dawn of Yang Chen. There were obviously cliffhangers from Rise going into Shadow, but it was mainly just like Yoon, like the cliffhanger of Yoon at the very end, in that like it's not like the end of the first book directly teased that the second book would be for sure Fire Nation focused. In this case, it's like nearly every thread from the first book continues into this book. There's so much that is left like wide open still to cover. We've been sort of introduced to all of these elements, and now we can properly get into sort of everything as well. The first thing obviously is like we hit the whole Bin-Er stuff. So this is where we were focused on in the first book, the first Shang City, and we see that she's basically the legendary Yang Chen there because she saved it, but they're highlighting that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily see her that way. And this theoretically will be the book where the full legend of Yang Chen is made, where she becomes sort of the character said in the same sentence as Avatar Salai, basically. I think that's what we're expecting here. How she handles this now worldwide sort of issue will clarify her legacy as a character. So that's important to realize. So the other Shang cities, I suppose, are going to come into play. I have that mentioned here. So Bin-Er, of course, this is what happened at the end of the first book. Rough agreement with King Feishan that the city Bin-Er will improve in the aftermath of the first book. Jonduri, of course, is the Chaisi Shang city. So the idea is, for political reasons and everything going on, there's a bit of a, can Yang Chen actually do anything there? This will be kind of a pretty big deal if we actually decide in the book we're going there. Port Tugok, of course, we got the name Zhongdu Ashuna, but we didn't get much on it. But there is an Order of White Lotus base in or around this kind of area. So, I don't know, this sort of feels like the odd one out, and that like, I guess it's that's the way it's going to work. And then Taku, the last one, referenced in the first book, but not really covered like at all. Book 2 apparently is going to be set here to a certain degree, but do keep in mind that FCE said that like literally like almost like the day the first book came out. So we don't know how far into writing the book he actually was. I assume it will play a role in the new book. It might not be where everything is 100% set, but I would be very surprised if we just ignore this place. I think he really likes the idea that we know a tiny bit about Taku from like the deep lore, website information from ATLA. And I think he wants to make that into something more. So we'll see what happens here overall. So that's the kind of big thing here, is that we're expecting by the end of the book to see some sort of a situation where we improve things in all of these places, or something so big happens that it results in the Shang cities in general as a concept going away. Because remember how the Platinum Affair works, that the Shang cities exist because of tensions from the Platinum Affair between all of the different nations. If the nations get on better terms, suddenly you don't really need the Shang cities anymore, and all of a sudden the the Zongdus are not necessarily needed either. So that's an important thing to realize, is that, like, obviously, as far as we were aware, either during Yang Chen's era or shortly afterwards, they go away, and they are not this thing that is super well talked about in the history of Avatar. Now, of course, we're learning about these in 2023. Of course, content from years ago isn't going to reference them. But the idea, of course, is that at some point, there's no need for these anymore. That relations between the nations improve, and there's no need for these. And Otaku is probably a good example of that. Of, like, it still is used for roughly the kind of merchant kind of like port that it sort of is meant to be, but it's never directly referenced as a still being a Shang city. So I'm interested to see, is that what we get in this book? Like, is Yang Chen literally going to, because her legacy is that she creates all these treaties and stuff like that. Does it end with her kind of creating some sort of a peace treaty with everyone and stuff like that? So there's that. So going back up here. So yeah, limited to a single city, unanimity, increasing tensions among the four nations. So this is where we need to bring up the world leaders here. So we have this. So we know of a High Chieftain Oyaluk for the Water Tribes, Earth King Feishan, of course, who is a fascinating character, of course, as we saw. Super important in the era-defining character. Fire Lord Gonryu. These two here are mostly just referred to, of course. But there's some very interesting things. Like, they're all looking for the truth about what happened in Bin-Er, because they know that it's more than just, I think, what Yang Chen is saying. One of the final chapters of the first book made it very clear that Feishan is kind of like, okay, Avatar Yang Chen, that's what you say. I'll still have my people look into this. And the idea from Yang Chen's perspective was that, yeah, it's going to get out the truth about what happened here. It's about kind of dealing with it when it actually happens. So that's super interesting. And then especially like the final chapter of the book with what the near assassination of Kavik, basically on the orders of like High Chieftain Oyaluk, effectively. He's like out trying to get the information here. So it highlights that the world leaders in this nation, in this era, are going for it. And again, highlighting that there are issues between the nations. Even though we're not directly at sort of war, the Shang cities have helped to kind of keep it from being that way. But tensions are on the kind of verge of like, it could descend into war if things go super badly. With the idea being, of course, that if unanimity fell into the hands of one specific nation over another, that would be a huge power swing. Like they're the sort of politics that we're dealing with here. So this is where I guess the book is going to start. So we have tensions between the nations. They're more aware that stuff is going on. I suppose they're all roughly aware that they're all trying to sort of like almost like spy on each other and Yang Chen and people associated with the Bin-Er incident to find out what's actually happening. So Yang Chen is going to try and be the diplomat that she usually is. And I'm guessing this will mean we will get scenes involving Feishan again and probably the other two world leaders as well. So I think that's going to be pretty exciting to see how that works in terms of characterizing the other two world leaders who we don't know as well as we know Feishan. It'll be interesting to see how exactly that works, and that like they're not all going to meet together in the same room, are they? So will it be her meeting them all separately? I don't really know. But either way, like it's a big deal here what we're dealing with. So this is what's happening at the start of the book, I'm guessing. I assume this will also have to happen somewhat early in the book also, just to set the plot into motion and show what we're really dealing with here. So there's a brutal assassination, and also Unanimity is freed. Now again, let's clarify here. Unanimity, I think I have it down here. Unanimity is, as far as we're aware so far, 3 combustion benders. That's what Unanimity is. Ultimately, I suppose you have to refer to it as being a grander project than just the 3 benders, because it's also the whole history of it in a way. Like, how was this discovered? What's the whole like details of this? Are there others beyond the 3 that we have captive? What's going on? Obviously, currently held in the Northern Air Temple, and as you can see in the cover, the Northern Air Temple is what they kind of show as the kind of imagery in the background. So I'm guessing at least some substantial scenes at some point in the book are going to happen here at the Northern Air Temple. The exact nature of which we'll see, but that's going to be pretty interesting. So the question obviously is, how heavily linked are these? Is it like some of the people guarding Unanimity get assassinated, resulting in the freeing? Or is this like, on the political side of thing with Yang Chen, there's an assassination, and also while that's going down, separately at the Northern Air Temple, the combustion benders are freed. What's going on here? And yeah, as mentioned, like, is one a diversion for the other, potentially? That's what's super interesting, because I would assume, I'll bring up a separate topic here actually for this. So the obviously ideas are like, the world leaders, and like the 3 that we know of. So like Oyaluk, Feishan, and Gonryu. They're potential candidates for this, but you wonder, like, okay, what's going on there? Who assassinates who? If it is more directly related to the combustion benders, then let's not forget that Zhongdu Henshi, whatever way you want to call him, he is also being kept hidden at the Air Temple as well. And because he knows stuff, does he get assassinated and the others get freed? And then are we talking about like the airbenders holding Unanimity? Is it them who gets assassinated? And that might include one of the kind of leaders of the Northern Air Temple. So like a air nomad world leader, there is a possibility of it. And then Feishan specifically, of course, we have the Lao Ge slash Tiegwai. I forget the pronunciation of that. Tiegwai, the mortal. So we know that a king in the past was killed by our good friend Lao Ge. Is this what happens here? Because this will be a crazy event, because Feishan is one of the leaders that we know like the most. He is the guy who the whole Platinum affair happened effectively because of his actions almost. He comes out of this as like a legend. Is this where it happens? This would be super crazy, because all of a sudden this would eliminate the threat of the era. This would open up things on a huge level, because Feishan is the one who can kind of bring the world to can kind of stop things himself. That's sort of the idea here. Look, we could spend all day trying to figure out with the calculations like who's who and what in the era. It's definitely a possibility, because I think everyone is expecting that FCE will utilize Lauga Tieguai in a different era that he writes for. And because this is obviously pre-Kyoshi stuff, the explanation, I think, would be probably that it is sort of possible to do that here. And it gets so complicated, yeah, as mentioned in chat there. Because Kyoshi, like, lives so long, she could have dealt with so many different Earth Kings herself, of course. So there's that kind of issue in terms of, like, where everything is. But, you know, I think it works out where it's certainly possible. But because Lao Ge is theoretically a couple of 1,000 years old, if you take the exaggerated number to be true, he could also, you know, that creates complications as well, also. So there's that. But I think these are the candidates. I assume these four, Oiluk, Feishan, Ganryu, and Henshi, are certainly the main candidates for the who will get assassinated. Henshi, Feishan feel like the really obvious characters to do it with, because this would change up the era drastically to get rid of such an enigmatic character. This would make sense if stuff is being orchestrated super, super heavily by Zhongdu Chaisi, which we'll get into here. So where were we here? So yeah, brutal assassination, freeing of unanimity. So the question here is obviously, okay, they get out. There are 3 combustion benders back in play. The question is, like, do they break themselves out? Who's arriving to break them out? Because if there is other members of unanimity, like, obviously a sudden attack by other combustion benders would be a huge way to break out the current combustion benders. And that would certainly create a worldwide threat, bumping up the number of combustion benders, like, drastically. And in a way, it has to be so big that Yang Chen is like, I cannot do this on my own. I'm going to have to bring Kavik in. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one, because I don't know. At least my assumption is that unanimity will make their way to Zhongdu Chaisi. I think that's sort of the way that it probably has to kind of play out. That there might be a few different layers of things happening here, but ultimately they are freed. And later on in the book, they'll be under Chaisi's control. Because ultimately we have to get to her to get the information on the project. I suppose this is where we have to get into some of the Chaisi's stuff, of course. So, as mentioned here, the book makes the really interesting note of highlighting that she's 7 months pregnant when we meet her in the first book. So the question is, like, there's going to be a little bit of a time jump, you know, so will she have given birth? Is she going to be, like, on the verge of giving birth, or has she all, or what, as we go into this book, or is it, like, immediately afterwards? This feels like it's there for a reason. Is it just to showcase, you know, her legacy, the fact that that's the thing that we're talking about here? What is her true motivation? Because when she talks to Yang Chen, she obviously lies and gives the impression that, oh yeah, I just want to do my time as a Zhongdu, and then give up the position like I'm expected to do. But Hansha is very much along this idea of, like, she's too ambitious to just give up this. She's planning for something more. She actually does want a legacy for herself. So her and her family, because she does note that there's the whole, like, unknown origins aspect of her, the island in the South Moses Sea, the idea that she's not entirely sure if she's more sort of like Earth Kingdom or Fire Nation kind of in her kind of lineage, because there's not really bending in her kind of history. That's kind of interesting. This is huge, of course, for people who read the books quite heavily. The fact that she's a reader of Shoken and also Guru Lahima. She obviously is a really good leader herself. remember the details that Zhongdu Dushim, who is the one before Hansha, those two are the ones who actually worked together to make unanimity sort of happen in the first place. So I'm wondering, like, is there a possibility for like a flashback with this, with what's going on? Will Dushim actually be like introduced at some point? That'll be interesting. And then of course the big thing, we are waiting for backstory on the like I said, backstory on the connection to combustion bending. And that's a key thing in all of this. And yeah, as mentioned in the chat, we can't forget about Kalyan. Kalyan is going to play a role in this book for sure, because, of course, he quote-unquote betrayed Chaisi to help Hansha, and that's the only reason that unanimity sort of left Chaisi's possession, basically. And it's clear something's going to happen. There has to be stuff with him as we go forward. There's obviously the speculation, the theory that what if Kalyan is the father of Chaisi's child? That could be a possibility. That would be actually kind of interesting. Or, what if he turns up and he's a Zhongdu of, like, he's the new Zhongdu of Taku or something like that. It feels like he's ambitious and that something big is going to happen with him. So I think something is going to have to happen with this. Because, Kavik, Kalyan, there's some sort of a confrontation that has to happen here because of the way they did their dynamic. But ultimately, they're still teasing the idea that it's Chaisi who is the kind of mastermind overall. The other theory about the child is definitely, as just mentioned in chat there, that if Chaisi and others have discovered the secret of combustion bending, well, I guess she would want to have her family then have a superpower in the family. So what if she has figured out the sort of way to sort of, in some way, with the right power of bending or whatever, have a child who she pretty much knows is going to be a combustion bender. Now again, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen here. They have to explain so many details here because the combustion bending point is super, super interesting because, for one, notable detail, there's no third eye tattoos at play here just yet. We're still in the sort of early days of combustion bending here. It's quite inefficient as a technique. Again, remember that they describe, especially Thapa, as having to do like lots and lots of really, really heavy breathing to even perform the technique like at all. Very different than how rapid fire Combustion Man and Pali are at combustion bending. How were the different candidates found for this? Like, what is the research that they went into? Of course, okay, firebending technique. Is it, as many have theorized, that it's like it has to be really large, tall people, well built to contain such a powerful ability? That's one of the things that would make a lot of sense. Then, like, do they have a powerful firebending lineage? And if so, then how does the kind of psychic aspect of this kind of really come out? Remember the drowning kind of mentions and stuff like that, implying that they basically told us that, like, people died trying to gain this ability. So it relates to water in some way. That the training that they go through seems crazy in some way. How does water help unlocking combustion bending, of course? Like, what's the idea here? Because, of course, we're ultimately talking about, like, one of the few avatar abilities that utilizes, like, one of the other chakras. So if you subscribe to the idea that obviously 4 of the chakras are elemental, like there's a fire, earth, air, water chakra, but then of the other 3, one of them is in the forehead, and it clearly plays a role in combustion bending, hence why hitting someone in the forehead is the counter to combustion bending, because it's about chi flow with there specifically, versus, obviously just normal bending, you kind of just target the limbs so they can't do it. Where did that come from? Because that suggests a more kind of spiritual kind of dynamic going on, ultimately. So that's kind of interesting. What do we have here? So yeah, there's so many details with this that need to come out. I suppose the obvious question here is like, what does chat think about this? Are there other combustion benders straight away? Like, are there other like people like Thoppa and so on who can already combustion bend who we just don't know about? Because I feel there has to be, I think there has to be at least one, ultimately, that someone who maybe is more of a kind of master combustion bender, someone who maybe gained it on their own, which is where they're developing these kind of skills from. Now, is there the possibility that it just straight up is Chicey? I'm not really sure about that, but I don't know. There's room for some kind of twists and stuff like that. Okay, so yeah, everyone's leaning in the direction definitely of yes, that because there was more people training who died, there's more either on the way or already who have it. Chicey Bender et al. She says she's not, and that there's no bending lineage in her kind of family line, but of course she lies in throughout a lot of the conversations with Yang Chen, so we don't know for sure if she's telling the truth. It's a possibility, but she overall seems to be presented as a non-bender so far. So, I don't know. Is it going to be a crazy Amon reveal again type thing? Or will she just be a non-bender who is seeking to like incorporate a powerful bending lineage into her future? That could be the interesting way to have the kind of switch on it be. And that's why she's putting so much like money, time, effort into investigating combustion bending and what's going on, because it's obviously a hugely powerful thing. So that's important. So yeah, we have that there, the characters. Question here in the chat: do you think Ying Su will reform in the sequel? So Ying Su, I think the idea here is that this is the last of them that Yang Chen got to. This is the one who got hit with the arrow and was quote unquote like saved by Yang Chen's mercy, effectively. So the idea is she potentially the one of the three capable of maybe like switching sides in some way or something like that? Because definitely right now, Thoppa, you would probably say, is the only character really among the three. The other two are just sort of like there overall. So Ying Su, that probably is the only other real dynamic they kind of set up, is the idea that Ying Su sort of directly got to see the kind of mercy of Yang Chen, that people still will kind of lean towards attempting to treat her well. So that's going to be an interesting point. So that's kind of key. What else do we have here? And yeah, like obviously the child, if she's given birth and it's just like a few months later, the idea is like because there's no way they're going to have the baby directly confirmed to be a combustion bender. If that's the way they're going with it, if it's a super, super, super young child, there's no way there's going to be a way to directly confirm the baby's a combustion bender. Unless they do some sort of crazy, brutal thing where she has lost her mind and attempts to try and like put her like newborn child through the combustion bending like process or something like that to force the ability out, which I don't think they would do something like that, but who knows? There's the room for some kind of crazy stuff in this, because we go slightly darker here than in some of the other things that we do. But I think for Chicey to play a role properly in the book, she probably has to have already given birth. So I'm definitely leaning in that idea. that's the way it's going to be. Otherwise, it kind of feels like it has to be more of like she just wants to start a family, and it's maybe the reverse of what I just said, and that this is the one thing that she's going to like care about apart from her ambitions. And that would be a little bit of an interesting dynamic to kind of play into things, but we'll see what way they go with it. So going back up here to the description. So yeah, let's talk about this. Yang Chen bringing Kavik back into the fold. So this is pretty much the kind of thing here. Yang Chen no longer trust Kavik. Will they reunite? So the book is already confirming they will, and I think you always had to do this. I don't think there's any way you were going to go the whole book without the two of them having a conversation again. And it's fascinating, of course, because the details of what happened and then specifically how this sort of, kind of breakup of their kind of relationship at the end happened. It definitely felt like, there's still room for some communication here to fix this, in that Kavik obviously needs to apologize more. There needs to be a sense of Kavik showing her that even though he is a good liar, she can trust him in the key moments. And I think that this is probably where you need the growth on his side of things, where he has to sort of get over his the kind of inferiority complex that he basically has, that basically relates to his brother. That was such a key thing when Kalyan was introduced in the book, is that this is the person who Kavik looks up to above all else, Kalyan the Great. And Kalyan just like puts him down completely, that like, oh yeah, you're nowhere near as skilled as you think you are. Like, I basically assisted you in getting as far as you did in this whole incident. Do you really think the Avatar like values you that much? So he needs to grow to, I think, be confident in his abilities, and maybe, so that he won't have that kind of moment of weakness where he completely kind of like capitulated when in the scene with his brother. And then I think Yang Chen also needs to be a little bit more like, I know this person. I've had some really kind of emotional moments with him. And again, she doesn't maybe have to fully understand everything that happened, but like be a little bit maybe more understanding of that. It was this crazy situation with his brother who he's been looking for all this time. There was a sense of manipulation there because, of course, she doesn't really meet Kalyan. So, I don't know. There's room, I think, on both sides to build it up to this happening for sure. Now, I think everyone is immediately going to go to this here. This quote from the Kyoshi books that implies that two people close to Yang Chen die at some point. Now, from the first book, we of course got Jetson saving her. That's one. Are they going to do this with Kavik? Because it so far feels like it's maybe the only option. It kind of has to be Kavik or, I guess, Boma, because we don't know the other characters who would basically fit this situation. But we'll get back to that, I suppose. And then Jujinta we'll talk about a little later on. But this is a kind of key thing, is like having all this happen. So Kavik has to have his Kalyan kind of whole dynamic. Then what else will they do? Especially because Kavik is now Order of the White Lotus. Especially, this is going to be a kind of key moment. Oh god, where exactly does that Yang Chen information? I guess which book is that from? I think it's from Rise of Kyoshi. It's definitely the first book, I think. Yeah. Either way, like that is the exact quote. I just didn't put down which chapter it was from. People are saying it's the Lauga scene. But anyway, the chat I think is going to source that one exactly. So there it is in chat. Rise of Kyoshi, chapter 21. But yeah, Kavik being in Ordered White Lotus, and given the really important scene, the Ayunarak and Yang Chen scene from the first book, it'll be really interesting when this meetup happens, because I assume her bringing Kavik into play, like, is it just her reaching out to Kavik, or will it be her reaching out to the Order of the White Lotus, which now includes Kavik? Which way will that exactly go? Because and like, is this going to be another secret maybe between the two of them? I assume he's going to try and be honest here and just be clear that, like, yeah, I'm in the Order of the White Lotus, and you kind of wonder with regards to his plot, his arc. Has he been inducted for his skill, or just because he knows about unanimity? Like, is he going to be considered a true member here, or is this just, yeah, we're protecting you because you happen to be super involved in the Bin incident, and all this sort of stuff? Because it's going to be a big thing to see how exactly this ends up playing out. Because he has to have an individual arc with Kalyan, reunite with Yang Chen, and then in all of this plot, like, why specifically, I suppose in a way, how is Kavik specifically going to help with what has happened here? That it was Yang Chen who was the one who took down Unanimity. Now, there was help from Kavik, of course, but, like, is it just that she needs basically an errand runner to do some stuff, and that's what we're kind of playing into again? That's going to be pretty interesting to see kind of what happens here, because the first book actually kind of separated the two of them for quite a lot of the dynamics. So you had kind of Kavik doing his thing, Yang Chen doing her thing, and then specific scenes where they'd kind of meet up, and then obviously the early part of the book was quite focused on their relationship and addressing a lot of that stuff. And then, yeah, if he is Owl, you do wonder, like, how many of the kind of rituals kind of associated with it, like, does he know about, and, you know, will we learn more about the specifics of how this exactly all operates? That will be interesting to see. Then we get into Four Nations teeter on the brink of conflict. So the book is going to get to the point where a world war is kind of on the verge of breaking out again. So I wonder how exactly they're going to get to that point, because obviously if a world leader is assassinated in this, that would certainly lead to something like that happening. And she begins to unravel the power-hungry Zongdu Chaisi's true agenda, which you kind of wonder, like, what is her true agenda? Because as much as there are mysteries surrounding the character, they don't overly, like, tease, like, what exactly she's actually trying to accomplish. And that, like, okay, she ultimately seems to want some sort of a legacy for herself. She ultimately doesn't want to give up the power that she has as Zongdu. And I think she wants to rule over John Dury. But is because she knows what not to do, because she can't just do what Honsha did, that just a couple of combustion benders guarding the place that she's the leader of is not going to be enough to hold the line, as we saw. So if we get double, triple the amount of combustion benders, is that enough? That's not a good position to have the entire world focused on you. But if this political stuff is a huge distraction, she can solidify herself here in her kind of little kind of nation to itself. But then you sort of wonder, is it a plan to take over the world? That she is going to try and grow from here, use this to her advantage, and make a huge power play. Because if she's behind the assassination potentially of a world leader, that does suggest that she has, like, quite a lot of power. I don't know. It's kind of fascinating overall to see, and it's probably one of those ones where, like, if there's scenes to maybe really, really heavily reread before the book comes out, it probably is specifically the scenes with Zongdu Chaisi, to see a lot of what's talked about with her, specifically. That's going to be really, really exciting, to see how exactly they do that. Then it gets into, Yang Chen is forced to measure the worth of humanity that's ominous. I probably should mark this actually, because that's a pretty like big statement there. Let's see. I think her plans to form a clan is interesting because it's in only a century it will be undone due to Zoryu breaking the system down if unsuccessful. So yeah, that would be interesting. If like, is she trying to just like create her own like Fire Nation kind of clan, or is it more than that? I don't know. It'll be interesting. Okay, forced to measure the worth of humanity, and how much can be sacrificed in the name of balance. Okay, so the worth of humanity. So in relation to what the legacy of Yang Chen ultimately is, that she is a success from a political standpoint as a diplomat, in that she brings peace to between the nations. But she views herself as being a failure when it comes to spiritual matters. This is a weird one where, like, it basically is talking about, is she going to be put into a situation where it's like, you know, do you save this group of people or do you save this group of people? Do you save these one or two people that you're close to, or everyone here? How are we going to engineer that situation? Because I think what we're getting at here with Yang Chen is sort of the whole dual aspect of her character, where on one hand she is sort of the perfect avatar as you'd want to be, but then the character that she's forced to be most of the time to actually get stuff done, Spy Master Yang Chen, is the character who has to assume that everyone is trying to play her. No one actually cares about other people. She has to spy on people, make power plays herself, have her own like secret organization almost to herself to kind of do stuff. Is that kind of what we're getting into here? And characters in the first book criticized Yang Chen basically for like, you're not the avatar I expect you to be now, talking to you kind of one-on-one, seeing kind of both sides to you. And we'll see what happens. It's an interesting one to see, like, is that what we're kind of tackling here? How much does Yang Chen need to address that whole idea? Because especially like when she had the scene with the Order of the White Lotus, she was heavily criticized there, but Yang Chen was obviously able to counter-criticize the Order of the White Lotus kind of just as well, because of the idea of so many people in power just want to keep things the way they are, where she wants to properly change things. And then, as people are pointing out, the escape from the spirit world Yang Chen stuff is a huge thing as well. That, you know, the reason the avatar is always a human, measure, basically what it means to be a human. That's why the avatar is a human and is capable of making mistakes and isn't just an all-powerful being, is because to be the best avatar, you can't just be all-powerful. So that's a big point as well. And yeah, isn't that line referring to human spirit balance? We know she leans heavily in favor of humans. The question is going to be sort of like, where do spirits, if that is the case, where do spirits come into play in this book outside of this? Because this is a very separate plot. Now, if they introduce other spirit world stuff, obviously there is a opportunity to bring this into play in a bigger way. But this does seem like a very kind of side plot that we maybe will address maybe at the very start of the book or the very end of the book. That maybe instead of like what the Kyoshi books did at the end and have the big emotional past avatar scene, maybe this will be the ending with this book, will be the big scene in the spirit world of Yang Chen talking to Jetson. That will be an interesting one to see how it goes. But yeah, we'll get back to that in a second. Interesting. Yang Chen will seek help from Wan Shi Tong to learn about the Fog of Lost Souls to find Jetson. Tenzin learned about it from an ancient text. Chaisi's Shoken cult. It depends, I suppose, how much they go into like does the Shoken slash let me get this up again. Where are we going here? Does the Shoken Lahima readings like mean more than just what's going on? I don't know. It's an interesting one because there doesn't seem to be an obvious connection between what Chaisi is doing and like spirits, if we're maybe leaning down that direction. Now, unless there's some sort of a thing that like spirits have some sort of an assistance with like combustion bending in some way, which it seems like a weird way to connect it unless you get like super technical. I don't really know necessarily where we're going there. Because to me, like if there's maybe another solution to this, it's the whole. I could see some sort of connection between combustion bending and the Yuyans potentially, because of the whole Yuyans never miss type thing, and this kind of chakra point maybe mattering here and using the same thing for firebenders in this case could be something interesting. And the problem is, like, we don't know specifically with the Yuyans how much of a spiritual connection this necessarily is. Like, is there some sort of a special spirit that this kind of clan is familiar with, and maybe it like links into this? There's a way to do that, but I'm not sure if the full setup is there kind of across all these books to make that kind of work properly. But we'll see where we kind of go there. So where were we again? Yeah, measure the worth of humanity, how much can be sacrificed in the name of balance. So yeah, that's interesting. I think without any specifics here, it's very hard to properly go into it there. So yeah, there's that. And then this is more general because like a lot of the books have a same thing like this for the final section of the description, but it does seem to get a little bit specific here at the end. Finally making peace with her choices and facing Avatar Hood with the courage it demands. It's one of those ones where, like, would you say that this has been a challenge for Yang Chen, that she's not facing it at the moment with courage? And I don't know, unless they're really trying to get at the idea that sort of Spy Master Yang Chen isn't something that she needs to be doing a lot, and that there's a way to do it in the more typical Avatar way and still have it work, and she needs to lean more in that direction. I'm not necessarily sure what they mean there. Making peace with her choices is an interesting one, because this might relate more to sort of towards the end of the first book, where she's basically on the verge of giving up. Like, why do I put so much time and effort into this and just nothing ever works out? And it's her being told that, like, we found like the woman who you rescued, like, we found her son, like, it's worked out all because of you. And it's just of that little moment that gives her the kind of will to kind of continue on. So I guess this is just, I think this is probably alongside the idea of accept that she will make mistakes, that sort of thing, that she isn't perfect like all the other avatars. She will have regrets, there will be mistakes, but you have to be sort of, like, I suppose, confident with the decisions that you make if you have the best intentions in mind. again, I think they'll find a way to kind of tie this all together, like emotionally, and make it kind of work really, really well. So there's that. Yeah, there's a little bit of a discussion here in the chat about the other book that's like alongside the Shoken stuff, the whole 10 chapters on celestial circles and other artful mathematics. Yeah, like people are pointing out, like it might be just an Easter egg as like a mathematics book, but it could also be a little bit of a hint at maybe like building up to the kind of more spiritual aspect that is like the tattoos, like because you're sort of wondering like, okay, technical exploration of combustion bending, how did they get around to the tattoos being important, and celestial circles, like there's a way to do kind of stuff like that, because chi chakras and stuff like that in the Avatar world literally is like part of like the magic system and stuff like that. Like chi paths, knowing where they are is important, and so on. Like literally, if you have a chi imbalance, you can make yourself sick, as happened to Zuko and Lin. So I don't know. It could be a lot of nothing, but given that we are expecting like some sort of a explanation on the whole combustion bending thing, that you assume will have to go into some level of detail to establish the idea that we're getting a little bit into sort of like bending kind of like genetics, how exactly specific abilities get passed on, and especially surrounding one of the more specialized abilities like this. There's going to be some stuff at play here. So yeah, I suppose we should talk about Yujinta. I know for some people maybe they were like, is he going to be super important? But the book at the end basically kind of says that like, oh yeah, Yujinta's basically my companion now as well. Like he's full on like loyal to Yang Chen. So I'm assuming he's going to be in this book because there is an open plot thread with him as well, which is the whole idea of like he killed his brother and is now sort of at least for a certain amount of time, like there's almost an unwillingness to use the bow, which is the typical weapon of the Yuyan archers, until he needs to and is quote unquote redeemed by the Avatar. So I don't know, will we get a backstory on this? Because we are talking about like this is pre-military Yuyan, because was it Uzuku Yuyan is a Roku era character, if I remember correctly, which is where the Yuyan stuff I think properly happens. So this is like Yuyan clan, not Yuyan like archers, part of the Fire Nation military, which is interesting. They once again reference the whole idea of like it being a spiritual connection, and they're kind of almost like teasing the idea of like, oh, Yuyan doesn't miss, and it's kind of true. Like there's more to this than just they happen to kind of be good archers. There's like something spiritual in nature that fully active a Yuyan kind of almost can't miss. And so what exactly happened here? Does it relate to this in some way, that like he maybe shot trying to miss but ended up hitting his brother or something? Feels like we need to get something out of this. And then, like I said before, there is a way to potentially link this sort of Yuyan spiritual connection in with this, potentially, but I don't fully know for sure. There's room to work with here, but again, I'm not expecting huge things from Yujinta in this book, but at the very least, I would be expecting just like a little bit more from the character. And again, what if Yujinta is one of these other characters here? That would be an interesting one. If he has like regrets from killing his brother, he might fully redeem himself by protecting Yang Chen with his life. That could be interesting, but who knows? Who knows what way they're going to go with that? Do we have that much else to talk about here? Unanimity, obviously, they're going to come to play. World leaders, the Shang cities, Yang Chen. Yeah, I suppose the question is, like, how big of an impact at the end of this book will Yang Chen have made in terms of, like, she's still just going to be, like, 17, maybe 18 in this book. Is it just going to be, like, this incident is what truly makes her a legend? Or is this just going to be, like, kind of one of many things that she will go on to do going forward? That's a key point as well. But yeah, I think we need to talk about this, actually. This is probably the next one. This to me is probably one of the ones I'm most excited for in the whole book, because it feels like we have to get this. I think they wouldn't mention what they mentioned about this, which is that Jetson is still in the spirit world. Her spirit is still there, like, active, but it's being held in the Fog of Lost Souls. Now, technically, the book never fully says Fog of Lost Souls, but, like, it's basically, like, the only way to interpret it is it has to be the Fog of Lost Souls. So that's going to be a kind of interesting point. But I'm assuming Yang Chen at some point will make her way into the spirit world and will get Jetson out, and will have Yang Chen talking to Jetson. The question is, I suppose it's kind of all about the future of the character of Jetson, because at this point her body is dead. So is she just basically stuck now as a spirit? Like, the only choice that she can truly make is she's not in the fog anymore, and to just travel the spirit world and eventually, like Iroh, like the Painted Lady, become a actual spirit over time? Or can she choose to, no, I don't want to stay here? Can she choose to effectively complete her death and, like, try and leave the spirit world, but it, like, basically that's what fully completes her death, and, like, she reincarnates or whatever like that from there? That's an interesting one as well, because the emotion surrounding this scene is going to be pretty big, because I guess Yang Chen succeeding in helping Jetson is an important thing, because it's kind of been one of the failures so far, in that I think in the first book they mention she's tried multiple times to enter the spirit world but has never found that exact location. She's never found those exact spirits that kind of took her away. So what's exactly going to happen here? And then, yeah, the other point in this, as mentioned in the chat there, will part of this be potentially revealing that Jetson was the spy at the Air Temple while Yang Chen was growing up? Because it feels like it has to be one of the kind of three named kind of characters we get at the start of the book, which is Jetson, of course, Sering, or Abbess Dagmola. I don't know, it's a weird one, because it's this big reunion of effectively a character Yang Chen views as being a full-on, like, sister to her. So do you want to immediately add, like, nuance, so much nuance to that, where it's this happy, super emotional thing, but there's also a sense of betrayal in there as well? Or will it be a sense of, like, oh, Yang Chen accepting that the spying was ultimately some sort of protective measure for her deep down? I don't know. That's an odd situation to see how they do that, because it kind of has to be someone of note. Otherwise, like, why really mention it that much? It's an interesting one. So I'm just fascinated, like I said, it's to see if there is that sort of decision that can be made of, like, is there even a possibility for Jetson to be able to choose to sort of, like, move on? Or, like, is this going to be a thing where we actually have Jetson as another human spirit who theoretically could be someone else going forward. Now, I don't know if we're going to set up some sort of a weird situation where, like, Jetson is the painted lady type situation. I'm not sure about that. They're going to make the connection that blunt and obvious. But is it going to be a thing where, like, later on in some sort of other, like, novelization type thing, they can introduce that, like, oh, I'm this spirit, but previously I knew Avatar Yang Chen in the past type thing. So there's that. Maybe the understanding that the relationship wasn't a lie, even if Jetson had another purpose for being there. Yeah, that could be an interesting understanding of just, like, kind of just the acceptance of, like, even though she was there being a spy, it was still a real relationship. Like this same spy sacrificed herself to save you ultimately. That those two things are true at the same time, basically, is a kind of an interesting point. And Yang Chen, in a way, having to accept that. And in a way, there's a little bit of a kind of link back to Yang Chen herself, that, like, Yang Chen herself is also the diplomat, good avatar, but also spy Yang Chen as well. That's a big thing also. And it is just interesting as well that, like, Jetson is a deeply spiritual character. So I was actually listening to the very start of the audiobook earlier on, and a line that really stood out to me was Jetson kind of, against giving the advice to Yang Chen that, like, you know, to, like, the whole idea, like, there's no purpose in a way in the spirit world. It's just to exist, to just be there. And does Jetson want that in a way is an interesting one. But yeah, I think people want to see this one discussed. More of this. So Kalyan specifically. So he flees at the end of the book because obviously Hanche falls, gets captured, and that's the guy he was working for. So he has betrayed Chaisi and is left. So he's got himself out of this. He's out there, he's still in play. You do have to remember that according to Kavik, this guy is apparently an incredible waterbender. So it's not that he can't, like, hold his own or anything like that, but I guess just pure political power, he has nowhere to go. This is maybe, I think, potentially where you can bring Taku into play. Like, it would be interesting if he was the one to maybe take over Taku, because we don't know anything about it, and because the Zongdu of Taku, I don't think it was even named in the first book. Like, it feels like there's a way to kind of bring him into play in that way. But I suppose the question with his arc is, like, okay, we're expecting Kavik to meet up with him, but, like, are the two going to have a fight? Is that what we're doing here? Like, will we see basically Kavik the Lesser defeat Kalyan the Great? Is that the kind of thematic idea of this arc? Finally sort of showing that actually, Kalyan, you had the potential to be, like, one of the best ever in the past, but you leaned way too far into being an errand runner and now being involved with the Zongdus and the Shang merchants. Kavik, who you criticize for all these different reasons, has actually grown and now has the potential, and we now have to see Kavik fulfill that potential and be able to basically surpass his brother. Because again, we get the idea that, like, what, Kavik is also a quite skilled waterbender, and he's really good at grappling and wrestling and stuff like that. Will we see them actually kind of fight each other here? Or is there another role for Kalyan that, like, do we have to bring Kalyan into play? Do we have to find Kalyan and maybe form some sort of a kind of a ally relationship with him? Because he knows more of the inner workings of, like, Chaisi and the others, and so Kalyan is also in this, like, weird position. And might they actually try and, quote unquote, reunite the whole family? Because the question is, like, is Kalyan, like, lost? Has he completely lost himself in focusing so much on being like a Shang merchant, effectively, in his ambitions and his willingness to leave? Can he ever come back to being part of the family again? That's, I suppose, the bigger question in this. Or is he effectively going to just be the character that Kalyan that he basically was in the first book? That's the big thing in this. Let's see, we have two mixed responses there. I'm leaning towards an optimistic ending because Kavik's chapters have pointed out how family is huge in the Water Tribe, and then someone saying, I don't want to see a Kalyan redemption. So it's an interesting one. Has Kalyan done anything so far that is like so inherently bad that he can't come back from it? I don't think he's gone that far just yet. I think this all depends on like, where is he? What is he doing at the start of this book? Because if it is some sort of a thing where, like, imagine it's Kalyan who is the assassin. Like, what if he's the one who like frees Unanimity or something like that? That would be the point at which it's like, okay. Because I'm wondering, is that maybe the connection point? Does Yang Chen find out about what happened here, and the only information that comes out of it is that, like, it was a waterbender with 8 fingers or something like that. It was something that makes it clear that it was Kavik's brother. So I have to bring Kavik himself in on this mission because Kalyan is our target now, basically. That would be a cool way to make the plot actually happen. But that would definitely be going down the path of, you probably can't overly redeem Kalyan maybe from that point, if that's where they're doing. Yeah, there's a bit of a mix here, and some people being like, the books are darker, so maybe they might kill off Kalyan, have a bit of a tragic ending on that side of things. Other people having a little bit more hope. I don't know. There's a lot of room to work with for sure here. Certainly. Yeah, there is mentioned in chat there. What happened to Q, the kind of the person who Kalyan was initially working for, who was killed, of course. That was basically Kalyan's kind of like order, effectively. Like, well, he was killed. It came from Chai Si, but it was applied that it was kind of like executed by Kalyan, but bit of a weird kind of chain of command, like who exactly did it. But still, they're more the kind of shady dealings he's been dealing with. That, he's not just a businessman. He in John Dory, there is that sense that there's a lot more of just like, oh yeah, if someone's a problem, take them out. So there's that. That's an interesting one. Boma. What role is Boma going to play in the book? I honestly don't really know, because like, are they going to do this? Is this going to be Jetson and Boma? I don't know. It doesn't feel like the thing to do necessarily. Like, I don't know if they focused on him enough to like have him dying be like this really kind of affecting moment in the same way that like even Jetson was. I'm guessing he'll just be like around, sort of in a similar role to the first book. I don't know. Might they focus a little bit more on maybe the sort of like origin necessarily, like how the two kind of initially know each other, sort of thing. Yeah, but I think there's definitely people are thinking this is going to be Kavik here. Like I said, Jujinta could be possible. So it probably is like it's got to be one of those three Kavik, Jujinta, or Boma for this kind of slot here. Otherwise, there's probably a little bit too much work to introduce like the other bending teachers of Yang Chen, who are characters that we don't know like at all. I just, if they are going to kill off Kavik at the end of the book, I just kind of, they need to do that really, really well. Because this is one of those things where, like, I don't view, like, Kavik's betrayal from the first book as being, like, necessarily so big of a thing that to kind of make amends, he needs to die to kind of... You don't need to Darth Vader redemption Kavik. It's not like... We're not that far, I think. There's a way you can still do it well, ultimately, and have, like, Kavik have a huge influence on Yang Chen's life going forward, but, like... But you do need to do a lot of work, and I don't think it necessarily should be kind of, in a way, framing it as like Kavik does it as a redemption in death type thing. So to me, to do it that way, I probably want them to be back on better terms relatively early in the book, and then their development from there is separate from the kind of initial conflict at the start of the book to get to this kind of actually happening. And then, yeah, as people point out, the wording here is a little bit weird. Two of Yang Chen's close friends and bending teachers. And it's like, does that mean like both have to be true? That like both of them were a close friend and also a bending teacher, which can't be true for Jujinta because he's a non-bender. Now, there's maybe a way you could do that with Kavik. Maybe Kavik teaches her some unique waterbending moves that he knows. That's a way to do that. But you kind of need to really emphasize that like Kavik thought her something of note. Otherwise, do you just mean it's like two, and the two were like both of them were close friends and one was a bending teacher? But then it also says teachers. I don't know. It's a weird one. And then, yeah, but Boma, as far as we're aware, is not a bender either. So what's going on there? And then it could be the leader of the Air Temple. And then if it is another airbender, I don't know, at least to me, I'm not sure if that's going to have the same impact. I don't know if I feel super strongly about this if it was like Jetson and then this other airbender who will now reveal also, you know, thought Yang Chen airbending. But who knows? I think this is maybe a case where like we could be reading into this too much. This incident doesn't need to happen in this book. Yang Chen lives for like well after this book. This could be something that happens later in her life as well. Like there is the option for that to happen. That potentially like maybe it could be Kavik, but just much more down the road or something like that. I don't know. It's weird because like you introduced Kavik here, so do you want to do that full arc here or not? I don't know. I just feel that like you're taking a little bit of a risk to me if you're going to full on commit to it being Kavik, and you need to get that right if that's the plan to do it with. So there's that. Yeah, and then I think I mentioned this in my previous speculation. Sozin's comet in the book. I think now that we have the description of like, you know, an assassination happens, Unanimity gets freed. I'm assuming Sozin's comet isn't the reason why this happens. But based on the timeline, there should be a Sozin's comet that happens during Yang Chen's life at some point. And it could theoretically happen during the event of this book. I don't know if they do it, though. I really don't know if they'd necessarily go for that. Just because I think they have political sort of plans and like who was the assassin, who did it, who freed Unanimity. It's going to be more of those questions rather than just, oh yeah, like event happens and now they're freed because they're powerful. It then sort of puts a bit of a timer on the book where it's like, well, now all of a sudden the combustion benders are like obscenely powerful, but only for like a couple of hours, while like the like a day or whatever, a couple of hours while the comet kind of goes past. It's obviously like it is a theoretical way to do a thing where like all of a sudden your already powerful assets are like much more powerful, but I'm not sure. I think just because that is sort of like one of the core plot points in ATLA, like the main Avatar content, I don't think they'll use it in this necessarily. I'd be surprised. Maybe if they want to show us what combustion bending with the comet is, they could do it, but I'm not sure. I'd be surprised if that is the overall plan. So yeah. And then, well, I think I actually forgot to go over this. This as the main sort of like marketing tagline for the book, as well. Let's not forget that this is the case as well. Because if we open this, you'll note that on the kind of like marketing assets, it's also what they're using here when it comes around again. Yeah, common enemies make for strange friends. So, is there a specific reason why that is getting like brought up? Because okay, what dynamic are we talking about here? Like, it feels a bit weird to maybe frame this as being like Kavik in some way, that like, oh, I guess you betrayed me, but we have to team up to take on the people we're both fighting against. That technically is an answer. Is it we need to work with Chaisi against whoever's assassinating the world leaders potentially? Is it Yang Chen needs to team up with the world leaders against Chaisi? I'm not sure. And then people are pointing out that like, oh, what if the combustion benders like teaming up with someone else? And it's like, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting one because I just realized that we didn't talk about this, and it's addressing a pretty like interesting style of dynamic, like kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. And so who specifically are we talking about there? Because if Chaisi is the overall villain with her whole combustion bending plot, there's no way we're going to get to a point where we need to team up with her. I don't know. It's an interesting one because I don't know. Like, there's a way to maybe do some sort of a thing where it's like, work with me or the world will go to war or something like that. Like, if that's Chaisi's kind of like point in a way of like, I can basically force a world war to happen because of all this assassination stuff happening using my combustion benders. Avatar, you help me or this happens. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it just another way to be like, refer to Kavik? I don't know. And then that's probably the interesting point actually. Is this Kalyan? Common enemies make for strange friends, and in the context of the first book, it would certainly be weird having to team up with Kalyan, who, as we've discussed already, is in an interesting position where until we get reveals about what he's specifically up to, the assumption would be that he's kind of just out on his own, like, trying to stay under the radar. And if he potentially knows stuff about what's going on here, Yang Chen working with Kavik to bring his brother into the fold is an interesting one for both of them, because this is Kalyan is a character who kind of like orchestrated some of the stuff actually happening. And there's another good suggestion in chat there as well. What if Hansha is someone we end up working with? Because he also knows stuff. What if we maybe do some sort of a thing where we attempt to maybe redeem him? What if, like, because I've always been running with the idea that, like, oh, he's maybe one of the guys who gets assassinated. But if he doesn't, that leaves him out as a bit of a kind of loose end overall. If no one wants to deal with him, I think there is some use for this character. Because he was in a pretty notable position overall. And even though he doesn't know the full scope of everything, he knows more about Chicey than he's kind of letting on. So that is very, very interesting. Because you could definitely view it as like a situation where, like, okay, he was using his position. He was very much the sort of typical Shang merchant where he was just like, because his whole plot was like, I just want to do my time as a Zongdu, gain my money and get out. And he was kind of like, why is all this bad stuff happening to me? Why is this happening on my watch? And he's like, he was the leader who didn't want to do the work. I don't know. There's maybe a chance to do something with him. But yeah, as is mentioned there, like, is this a big enough dynamic to be the kind of headline act of the whole book? That this is the big, team up kind of thing. So that's an interesting one. Would Yang Chen teaming up with one of the world leaders be a big thing? I don't know if that necessarily works kind of in this way. Common enemies. So we sort of know, okay, like from Yang Chen's perspective, who like her enemies are, but like, who are the enemies of like certain other characters? I suppose is maybe the way to think about this. For the other world leaders, their enemies are the other world leaders. Plus, I would guess Chicey, if they become aware that she is the one behind this, because that's the other thing in this, is that because of the weird political situation at the end of the book, Yang Chen knows that Zongdu Chicey is sort of like up to something and behind a lot of this stuff, but she can't really become super open with it because she almost risks, by going public with that, putting John Dory like at risk in a way. So that's kind of an interesting one. And then for Chicey herself, her enemies, I guess, would be theoretically the Avatar. But if she wants to work with Yang Chen, it would make, I guess, the other world leaders her enemies. Because in a way, there was the thing that Honshu was like really afraid of. But what if she has found a way to be like, with this situation, the world leaders don't matter. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we leave Honshu furious. Yang Chen doesn't even want to talk to him. Yeah. So yeah, that is the end of the book. Yeah, like he was almost trying to like try and come up with some sort of a deal, but she's just like, yeah, no, I'm not listening to your words anymore. But I think the point here is maybe more post assassination. It probably changes some things here. And it's more important to be like, okay, we need to figure out what's going on. Because at the end of the first book, Yang Chen's in a bit of a situation where she almost can't really act against anyone because of the weird situations going on, where it is not public yet that Unanimity is combustion benders. It is not public which Zongdus are like the bad guys necessarily, and so there's a lot of complicated situations that will evolve, like, I guess, once the early stages of this book play out. I guess, do we think anything will happen with Mama Ayunarak? she's obviously, I'm assuming she's going to be in the book. If we have Kavik, we're going to reintroduce her as well, because at least for me, one of my favorite, and I think probably one of the best written parts of the first book, was the Yang Chen and a Unarak scene. Avatar versus Order of the White Lotus. That was a hugely important scene to see the different kind of philosophies. So I think that coming up again would be really interesting to see, you know, where she's at in this book. And because it felt like the end of that book was effectively Order of the White Lotus jumping into action in a way because of what's happening, by specifically seeking out and getting Kavik as part of their team. If this goes worldwide, surely that meets the conditions for the Order of the White Lotus to step in themselves. Maybe just the mystery initially of the kind of threat in the first book, where we don't really know what exactly it is until right at the end, they held back. But surely they have to be straight away involved if there potentially is a world leader assassination and the threat to the world is bigger. So that could be quite an interesting thing. And I don't know, they might go the way of like both characters coming more towards the middle of like a Unarak realizing, yeah, the White Lotus needs to be more active in the world, and then Yang Chen maybe realizing, and yes, maybe I need to be a little bit more careful about the sort of, in a way, legacy of the Avatar, and be careful about how spy dark of an approach I maybe take. And then the because we have that Order of White Lotus thing, there's the chance for like this is where the reveal about the spy maybe comes out. There's that. I don't know. There's some interesting things. Like, a lot depends on this, if it means like specifically Kavik, or Kavik and the Order of the White Lotus. And then is Yang Chen going to be aware that Kavik is Order of the White Lotus in the book, is also an interesting point. So there's that. And then the question again, I think this is what we started with, but I do want to mention it again just because at this point it was a while ago. Do we think they will go into past Avatar stuff or not? So now that we've sort of discussed almost like theoretically where the book can go, where can they include Yang Chen past Avatar scenes? Where is there a possibility to actually do some of this stuff? Because I feel they have to do at least something. And the obvious options would be notable like Zito scene at the end to show that like it can actually happen. If she is going to go into the spirit world and search for Jetson, there's the possibility that like past lives are the ones to help her make that happen. That's an option to do some stuff with. But the other effect, which is that like just stuff happening can kind of like trigger like traumatic events from other past avatars. Will we get more of those situations, like when she was sneaking under the floors through the kind of the heating system to spy on the Shang meeting, and the claustrophobic avatar got kind of alluded to and stuff like that? Will more of that stuff come out? And in this case, I'm wondering like maybe Zito will come up, because I go back to the fact that she mentioned to a Unarak that she talked to dozens upon dozens of past lives, but she never mentions any of them specifically. And you'd think, because she's gotten a little bit into the habit of being like, oh, like to Feishan at the very end of the book, she's like, and I can make sure that through the past life of Zito, we will change Bin for the better using his advice. Even though she's lying that like it doesn't work like that, he doesn't need to know that. But she's gone from being a kind of resentful of kind of feeling like she has to do this to being like, yeah, I'll just do this. No one needs to know the details. But will we actually get stuff on Zito? Because there were a little mention or two of Zito in the first book. I don't know. I'm wondering, like, will they do a thing where maybe she's kind of avoided talking to him much or at all? And this can make a little bit more sense because for her it's always open. So there's no sort of a sense of like you have to go directly in one order or the other. For her, it's always just been all of them almost at once. So I don't know. There's room to do stuff with. And then yeah, that's a good mention in the chat there. The other minor characters from the first book, Taegum and Akudan, will we see them in the book as our sort of like pseudo avatar companions? I assume we will get them. I have to assume that will be the case because obviously that's where they kind of like operate is in Jonderie. But I suppose the question is like because they were with the main group kind of like fighting, I suppose, at the end of the book in Bin were they able to go back to Jonderie given almost like the political situation going on? So you kind of wonder like, will they still be like Yang Chen's agents in Jonderie? Or have they had to kind of maybe go back to the Water Tribe or something like that? But my assumption is that like if Yang Chen has a quote-unquote team avatar with her, I guess it is Jujinta, Akudan, and Taegum. And then Kavik will come into play. I'm not sure. Will they overly focus on them all that much? Or will this be more of a sort of like, say, Kirima and Wong situation where they weren't really in the second book apart from like a reference and they kind of came in at the end? I think that will be more of the kind of involvement they get. But I think Jujinta will have to be a little bit more involved, ultimately, I think. So that's that. They had to move to Taku. Maybe. Because it does bring up the idea of, like, what brings Taku into play in this book at all? Now, we obviously know what he said, what FCE said in that interview from, like, a year ago. It doesn't mean the book has to be, like, the main location is Taku. I guess it just means that, I guess, we'll see it potentially at some point in this book. What are we doing there? Like, are we going to meet who the Zongdu is? Is this like is maybe there a secret location here where like Chai-Si has control over? Will this be where Kalyan is? I'm not really sure. There's definitely some interesting kind of ways to go with that. What else do we have? Okay, stability to Bin unanimity, increasing tensions among the nations. I suppose with I do want to mention this quite briefly, Feishan. Do you think there is more to the Platinum Affair that we don't know about? Like, they covered it like pretty quickly. When you go back and read it, like they covered the whole like this is the details of what actually happened quite quickly, and you kind of wonder like like because the story is just like, and Feishan was awesome and just like did this political move and kind of came out of it looking like incredible, but like how did he know what to do in a way? Like did he just get lucky? Because you remember like how young he is. Like you think all the world leaders, you expected them to be kind of middle-aged or maybe elderly, but like Feishan's like super young to be an Earth King and to be as like threatening and dominant of an Earth King as he is. What's going on here? And then yeah, spies. This is where like a lot of spy stuff has got to come into play. And I don't know, like, this is just kind of this crazy thing where he's 28 at the end of the book, and I think Platinum Affair was 8 years ago, so he was like 20, I think, when this happened, and it's like, huh? How did he know exactly how to dominate things like that? And then the general from that story, General Nong. I don't know about that. There might just be some sort of thing to add a bit more depth to Fei Shan and just reveal that, like, oh yeah, this is how I actually, like, orchestrated it. That, like, this is how the world knows how it went down, but, like, there's maybe a little bit of an extra thing on Fei Shan's side that this is what I did to win the day. And I don't know. That makes me kind of think that, like, if there is an assassination target, it should be him. But he's so interesting of a character. Do you want to eliminate him, like, super early in the book? It obviously changes the era because you take out the character who defined the era, but do you want to do that? I'm not really sure. There's certainly some room to work with. It would definitely allow for, like, I suppose, you to do a little bit more with Ganryu and Oyaluk, if Fei Shan maybe gets removed from the picture. But it's hard to fully say the exact details. And then, this does get in again to the point of the issue between the world leaders is what basically leads to issues between the nations, which leads to the formation of the Shang cities. And we know historically these don't last, at least past an era or two from now. So what are we doing in this book kind of with these kind of places? Will a peace agreement between the nations sort of be reached at the end of this book? And if it is one of our leaders here who falls, like, the next kind of leader could be, like, an interesting kind of character to see who gets put in place. There's certainly some room to do some stuff with. But yeah, certainly the description is highlighting this. Like, this is probably the big thing for me. It's just like, okay, what's the goal here? This is teasing our main villain, true agenda. What are we talking about here? That's a pretty fascinating thing to me to see. Is just like, okay, what gets revealed in all of this? Like, you see power hungry, and you often think, like, oh, is her goal just to want to rule the world? Like, okay, that's a very villainous plot, but if you write the motivation well, it can still work just being power hungry. But you kind of want there to be more, especially because she has done, like, all this technical work to organize, like, Unanimity and all this sort of stuff. What's going on? And obviously, if she has as potentially as many combustion benders as we perhaps think, she has power over the heads of state ultimately, because they want they'll want combustion benders of their own if they're so powerful, and she's the one who controls basically where they come from and how to get them. So that's a big deal. And then, yeah, there's a few questions, like, you know, like the assassination. Like, is the book going to start out as a sort of, like, is it going to be a whodunit type thing? Like, are we going to be wondering for the entire book who assassinated them? And, like, are we going to be wondering for the whole book, is it just the nations sniping at each other, or has Chai-Si orchestrated assassination attempts? Or will it be clear from the start that, like, no, like, we know this one was done by this group and stuff like that? Is interesting. Question there. Does combustion bending publicly go away after Yang Chen's era, since special stuff like lightning bending was so shocking to Kyoshi? Yeah, that is an interesting point here. Like, you almost forget that, is that, like, yeah, in Kyoshi's era, lightning bending is this crazy thing. No one mentions combustion bending, which is actually the rarer ability. Um, Now, the point I suppose here is that combustion bending, where we end the first book, combustion bending is still this crazy secret thing. Like, literally, there are like a handful of characters in like the entire world who seem to know what combustion bending actually is, just worldwide. Um, that's a little bit different than the reason lightning bending is like secretive, which is because it's sort of like kept secret by the people who know it, and they purposefully don't spread it. And um, so this is why it's kept in specific noble lines, royal family lines, specific people who happen to like learn the technique themselves, and they're studied and it's like taken from them, that sort of thing. But with combustion bending, they're obviously presenting the idea here is that we're probably going to get the mystery of why it happens and stuff like that. And because where is it here? Yeah, because it seems like there's the torturous like training, drowning is involved and stuff like that. The idea that like certain people just sort of like happen to kind of come across it is relatively rare. If this works out as nicely as it potentially could, then yeah, we could end the book in a way where there are ultimately very few people who know about combustion bending. Especially because even if characters know it exists, if potentially, like, say, Yang Chen infiltrates the place where all this combustion bending thing happens, if she shuts it down and just doesn't tell anyone about what she saw, then, and all the key people are not able to do it again, then sure, you can get across the idea that this is how combustion bending is sort of like discovered effectively in this era, but it's also how it's lost in this era. That Yang Chen kind of like doesn't allow that secret to continue. And it's only the sort of almost like the special benders who are like perfect people to like learn the ability where it comes back with. And I don't know, maybe there is a way to set up in the future some sort of a thing where, like, with whatever Combustion Man's origin is, with whatever Poli's origin is, that there is just like one or two people out there who remember or know the secrets of combustion bending, and that's how it happens. A lot depends on the details of how it actually happens. So it's a bit of a weird one, ultimately, but I think that's the idea that they're going for here, is that they found a way to sort of like forcibly sort of awaken new combustion benders. But as we know from like bending across the Avatar franchise, there are just some benders who will be born and just have a natural talent for high level skills, and they will be suited to just sort of unlocking it in a way that's like easier than the forced way to kind of make it happen. And I think that's the whole idea for it, is like, it's kind of almost what they're alluding to in a way with like Yukon and his family, where like they're specifically a powerful line of bloodbenders, so they were able to very quickly adapt their ability from typical bloodbending to using it whenever. But no one has yet sort of like mastered the art of forcing that to happen with everyone who can possibly bloodbend, because it's one family line where it happened with. And it's the idea that because all that family died, the secret of psychic bloodbending was kind of lost with them until another particularly powerful and super talented bender is born. And I'm guessing that's just the idea with Combustion Man and whatever, is that maybe he had a really tough life, and in the same way that apparently some sort of water or pressure type thing can force the ability to awaken, some sort of trauma in his life could have awakened his powers. And it's almost implied that with Pali and sort of what happened to her, that's some aspect of it. But I suppose she was taken by the warlord because she was a combustion bender, I believe was sort of the idea, wasn't it? I'm not really sure, because I don't. They never directly addressed the idea that like how she learned her skill, just that like this was her backstory. But I think the idea was that like she was of note to a warlord because of her skills, and that's why she was used as like the assassin type thing, killing machine type thing. So I don't know. Maybe again it was some sort of a like harsh kind of childhood type thing that again pressurized her in a way where like it unlocked unlocked that power. Because I don't know, like, will they find a way where like the combustion bending backstory explained here does technically give us the answer to Combustion Man and Pili? I'm not sure if they'll quite go into that, but there might be a way to sort of like stretch the idea of the explanation to fit with the other characters, depending on what it is. So, you know, we'll see what exactly happens, of course. But certainly, I do feel that it means that we probably have to have like, you know, like what, at least a sort of like we have to have sort of like at least one more experienced combustion bender in addition to the three that we already know about, just to sort of explain like how they learned some of this stuff, and that will be quite interesting to see how exactly like that all comes about, and like who it is. Like, is there some sort of a big secret reveal or not? But yeah, that's a kind of interesting one. What else do we have here? I think someone in chat asked about this. Does Chai-Si reading Shoken like mean anything in particular? Like, does this define her philosophy, or is it just a book she's read and it kind of highlights a little bit of things about her? I'm not sure, because I know a lot of people like to really read super heavily into like the Lahima stuff and the Shoken stuff, and maybe there's a way where like they use this as a way to really highlight that, oh, these are those philosophies taken to an extreme, but I'm not overly sure. And there is the setup for like, you know, does all this references happening here potentially mean that our friend Lao Ge is scheduled for an appearance? Who knows? Who knows? But it's interesting, definitely, to see what way this all goes. If like, yeah, does the book mean anything? We'll see. Because I'm kind of thinking about like, you know, like what specifically with Shoken's like philosophies is like the specifics. I'm not sure if we even know too much about the specific kind of like philosophy all that much. It's just a very like blunt kind of philosophy of, you know, the whole idea of like, what is it like if you meet a spirit in the road, like slay it or whatever, which could be interesting, but I think there'd be quite a lot of work you maybe need to do to fully get into the idea that like the big reveal behind the scenes is that Chai-Si just follows these beliefs or whatever to an insane degree. And then you'd have to have like, what does Yang Chen literally just read the book that she was given by Chai-Si, and that's like the key like truth behind it all? So there's that whole thing as well, which is interesting. So yeah, and then like, yeah, like I said earlier on, like Dushim, is there a way? Did they confirm in the book? Is he dead, or did he just retire? Or wait, did they say he retired? He did his time as Zhongdu and then died? I forget. Is he fully gone? I can't even remember that. I'm pretty sure they say he's dead. that like he retired rich, wealthy. He did his time as Zongdu, and he died in peace, basically, because the idea is that like what Hansha kind of like wants to live that life where it just is like he got in, he got out, and had the best time of his life afterwards. I think that's the idea. But he was involved in this. We do know that. So kind of wonder. That's a kind of big deal. I don't know. Like I think it would be a bit of a weird reveal if it was just like, and the big reveal at the end of the chapter, Dushim is still alive. I think a lot of people would be like, wait, who? If you don't remember the references to him in the first book, it would be a bit of a weird, like, big reveal to try and get across. Especially because, what is it? Especially because they're trying to present Chicey as being the character behind it all. I don't think she necessarily needs to have like another guy of like the equivalent kind of position overall. So there's that. Yeah, the tenure for Zongdu's between 5 and 10 years. I forget the exact number, but like it's a surprisingly small amount. Because again, they kind of really highlighted the idea that sure, it's sort of a important leadership position, but it seems like it's been mostly constructed to allow people to come into the position, gain money, leave without actually doing anything particularly notable as leader. So it all feels a little bit like a scam, which kind of highlights the idea that like, yeah, the whole Shang system is just sort of a bunch of people profiting from tensions between the other nations in a kind of weird way, where like they fundamentally are positions that don't really need to exist, but they do. So we'll see what happens there. And I don't know, is it something like that maybe? Does Chicey just want to keep the tensions between the nations going, but so that the Zongdus will always be needed, and that's kind of her goal? That's a key point. Third eye tattoos. Like, I think the only way to get to this is if you reveal that the sort of person who maybe is behind where some of the information about combustion bending, where it comes from, if they have a tattoo and know what the deal is, that's an interesting one. As I speculated before, I wonder if the Yuyans is maybe where the spiritual sort of like tattoo maybe connection comes from, and the slight connection between their long range ability with accuracy and the power of combustion bending. I'm not really sure, but it's key. So for me, like, the things I'm looking forward to, of course, most of all, are probably like, yes, I really want to know what the explanation of the combustion bending is. I don't need them to go super technical, but I would like them to approach a little bit of a technical explanation, just because I feel it's sort of needed beyond. I just hope it's not too vague, basically, because the drowning stuff from the first book was interesting, and I definitely wanted that. Like I said earlier, to me the Jetson plot, which might not be as big of a huge plot point in the book, I think this is a big kind of one for me, where I'm really eager to see the emotion of this and how it kind of plays out in the book. I'd actually say the Kalyan plot is quite good. The sort of the two main characters, they're sort of almost like side plot within the book. I think they're both set up kind of quite well, like for the important kind of like family member type character to them, to see how they each kind of deal with them, and then also in terms of reacting with each other. So there. And then we probably do need to address this a little bit. Yang Chen and Kavik shipping. Are they doing anything with this? Will it be romance in any way? I don't know. I really, really don't know. It's one of those ones where it's like I don't go crazy for the shipping stuff, but like if you write a romance and you write it well, I'm usually pretty up for it, and I think it could add like an interesting kind of aspect to the characters, especially like, you know, Yang Chen is like an avatar where like we don't know like if she ever had like a family or anything like that. It would be interesting to just kind of confirm if something was happening there. I do feel like ultimately in this book they're leaning more into the direction of like the fixing of this friendship, of like this key important companion character for Yang Chen. And so they're going to emphasize that probably more than trying to jump further into romance. If they do decide to kill off Kavik, I can see them maybe going with some sort of an idea where like it is this sort of thing where like it could have happened, but he like died like before they could really get there. There's that. I don't know. It's one of those things where like you don't want to force a romance in when it's maybe not needed, but I'm also like I don't want to rule out romance either, because I think it can add some nice layers to something. It's interesting because you have little moments from the first book where you can definitely interpret the scenes as being like a little bit kind of romantic leaning, in the sense that like Kavik, I think it notes once or twice that he does find Yang Chen attractive. It's probably more on the Yang Chen side of things, just that like she is so busy doing all this other stuff, she doesn't quite sit back to like look at that stuff. But I don't know. Is there time for it even in the book? I'm not sure, but we'll see that. Yeah. Yeah, because like, I think when I was initially doing my review, because I got the book like super early, and people were asking me like from the first book, is there romance between like the two main characters? And I was kind of like, ultimately, like it's like no, in terms of like especially it being as clear as Kyoshi and Rangi in the Kyoshi books, but there are certainly little moments you can kind of like take to go in that direction if you really want to. But we'll see what happens there. But you know, we'll see what they do. Is probably the big thing here. I think we're mostly done with the speculation here. So I suppose I'll just bring up the question here. Obviously, the idea was that we learned about this book, that it exists, Yang Chen Book 2, right basically as the first book was announced. Do you think we'll learn about the next Chronicles of the Avatar book like pretty soon once this book actually releases? And which Avatar do you think they're going for next? Because they're certainly doing more. It's just about kind of what we're actually doing here. Because based on the 4-book set, like this is Yang Chen is 2 books, so we're moving on to another Avatar next. I think regardless, the Roku I think feels like the one you have to do, because I think FCE. I forget the interview where he said it, but like he said something along the lines of like the stuff he feels comfortable writing is the the avatars where we actually know like a little bit about. So Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Roku would be the obvious one, because I'm not sure if Karuk necessarily has enough material left to maybe do 2 full books, or are they willing to go for like a solo book at this point. Roku feels like with the Legends RPG information, it's all there. The setup is all there. We just need to get like a story in that era to flesh it out a little bit more. That's my idea. Especially because like right now they seem to want to focus on kind of like the known avatars, even though I know like a lot of people like myself would love it if they went for a bit more of an unknown avatar, like Zito, Salai, or even if they just did like an avatar we'd never heard about before and just did brand new avatar, like we're just going for it. I'd be completely up for that. But are we at the point yet where we can do that? Now, it's obviously a bit of a weird thing, obviously, because Avatar fans, like, say, prior to the Yang Chen books, like, how well did we really know Yang Chen? And how much more valuable is it that, like, oh, people remember Yang Chen from, like, the 1 or 2 scenes that we saw her in, versus this is a completely new avatar you know anything about it. That's always like a bit of a weird one, where it's still ultimately like referencing somewhat like not super well known material or moments from the show. I don't know, because like obviously it'll sell just by the nature of the franchise it's in. I don't know, but I think while Roku is on the table still to be explored, I don't think we're going to move on to an unknown yet. Because I think everyone really wants to know about Zaysan. It does get into a little bit of an unfortunate situation of like, if you do Roku next, how do you do that story where it's Chronicles of the Avatar, so Roku himself is going to have to be the plot of the book to at least a certain degree, but you kind of want it to be Zaysan focused because she's where so much of like the interest is, and can you make that work? Because it's a weird one, because ultimately Zaysan is opposing Sozin, but it's at a time period theoretically where Roku can't know that Sozin is like that bad until much later on. So do you just do complete separate plots versus like what we've had so far, which is mostly like these two characters meet and they split up and you get slight kind of different perspectives. In Rise of Kyoshi, we did have like sort of separate like Janju chapters. In Shadow of Kyoshi, we had separate Yun chapters, but they were somewhat minimal. Whereas with Roku and Zaysan, you'd probably want like it to be probably like a pretty even like half split, if not maybe even favoring Zaysan a little bit more, because you can probably do more reveals on her side of the story, whereas Roku, because of the way they told his like initial story, can't be overly involved with certain things that we're kind of exploring. So I don't know, like I think you can bring it in, like if you're going to deal with the whole idea of like, okay, the Fire Nation dealing with the impact of like air nomad culture on it, and the kind of mystery of like, well, what's going on here? There's like protests, the Guiding Wind are like taking over this facility. People are accusing the Guiding Wind of causing all this kind of like problems, like people are attacking other people, but people are being framed. You could bring Roku in on that side of things, and he works with Zaysan just to a certain degree, but then they maybe split up and Zaysan happens to come across more of the darker side of Sozin, and because you're ultimately building up to the idea of like, basically, what happens to Zaysan? Like that's the really, really, really big thing of like, what happens to this character to where she doesn't play the role that she wants to play based on what we're told, because she wants to take down like the kind of corrupt royal family. Basically, she wants to change things for the better, But she doesn't become Fire Lord at some point. So how exactly does this all play out? And it feels like, the build up is all towards like what the wedding of Kandro and Zaysan. Do you write that story? Like what happens like the day of the wedding, initially afterwards, the aftermath, and what exactly goes on there? Because that's an important wedding. Roku would probably attend that, and that's a way to bring Roku into play. But we'll see what happens. And it would be interesting if you maybe did some sort of a thing where like maybe like Sozin orchestrates some sort of an incident that causes Roku to have to leave as the Avatar to deal with it, and suddenly Zaysan's kind of on her own and stuff goes bad. I don't know. It's interesting, but I think that's probably the way to go, because I think you do need to tackle what's become a little bit of a problem in the fandom, which is that I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. The fandom has this obsession with always needing to have this is the worst Avatar. They always have to pick someone to be the worst Avatar. And at the moment, I think people have decided that is Roku, which I think is unfair. And, admittedly, I've always been someone who doesn't really like that question, full stop. And I'm so glad that I do have content on my channel from before the books came out, where, like, I was defending, like, Karuk before the books even came out. Like, I was just, like, I don't think there's any way that this character is just, like, useless. I think there's something more to his story, and I'm so glad I was sort of proven right with the way Karuk ended up getting written. And now that we all feel sympathy towards Karuk, everyone's like, sights set on Roku because he didn't kill his best friend. And there's so much hindsight involved in it, of course, because at the time when he could have killed Sozin hasn't done probably like enough wrong to justify killing him like right then and there, like a Avatar assassination type thing. Like, I get it, like it's like you've taken over Earth Kingdom territory, and kind of what's wrong with you, but it's like it's people like being like, well, Sozin goes on to commit a genocide against the air nomads and basically against half the water tribe, but that doesn't happen until later. And it's just that kind of like justification type situation overall. And again, this is why, like, I don't get, like, people like, there are some people out there who dislike the Promise comic because they have the plot point of like Zuko being to Aang, like, if I go bad, like, kill me. And then you get to the moment where it's like, oh, Aang is about to do that, and it's like, well, he shouldn't, because this is not the right moment. And it's just like, this is the same logic here. Like, by your logic, Aang should kill Zuko in this moment, but that's not the idea. Look, it's just people forgetting the kind of like general philosophies of Avatar. It's the same reason there's a lot of people out there who are very opposed to character redemptions. Like, even though we don't actually have that many character redemptions in all of Avatar, people have really just like planted their flag. This is my position. No more character redemptions. Even though it's just like, well, it's the nature of the series to, for the most part, be quite forgiving to characters. That's a bit of a weird one. But yeah, the worst Avatar kind of thing in the fandom is always been weird. Just because it's like, yeah, because it's inherently negative, of course. It's like, let's highlight this for some reason. I don't know. But yeah, like, I hope they have a plan straight away for like next novels. If it is Roku, I assume FCE will stay on board. If they're gonna do something maybe a little bit more different, I suppose this is where we kind of bring up the idea of like, what are your guys' thoughts on like the introduction of like new writers, or like when do you think that's going to happen? Because as much as I think we want FCE to just kind of write all the Avatar novels, eventually, just for the sake of like these are going to have to continue for years and years, we're going to have to bring in some new writers to do novels if we plan to expand it, or eventually we'll get to a point where like, how many novels is too many for FCE to write, type thing. I'm wondering like when they'll make that decision to actually do that. So I almost have the feeling that like I could see like 2 Roku novels being like what he'll do as like his last thing, or I don't know, maybe Roku is like a decent chance to bring a new writer on board, because it's an era that's close to like getting towards like Aang and like more familiar territory. And if they have just relatively recently fleshed out that era with Avatar Studios content, it's maybe a decent spot for a new writer to kind of go into, to tell that story. I'm not sure, but I feel FCE probably should be to do the Roku ones if that's what's happening next. They obviously have to make the right choices with the writers, of course. I think in FCE they found someone who really knows Avatar like well. In terms of like just they seem to get the general idea, the right approach for Avatar. Now, of course, like it's being discussed in chat there, like there's assistance from Avatar Studios, but because Avatar Studios is so like, it exists, trust us, stuff is happening. You don't know really what happens, like, because we don't know the specific stages of like, they apparently have people who are specifically there for continuity, but like, who is it? Like, will we ever know it? I don't know. You have those sort of like situations of like, who does that get passed through? Obviously Mike and Brian to some degree we know have assisted on things, but now that we're properly in like production on the other projects, do they have time to set aside for the novels while all this is going on? I'm not sure. Let's see, how long was the gap from Shadow Kyoshi to the dawn of Yang Chen? Basically, what was it? It was like, it was just a gap year. Basically, wasn't it? Because we got Rise of Kyoshi, like, because all the books have come out in like July of the year they came out in. So we got a book in July 19, July 20. No book in 2021. July 2022, last year we got Dawn, and this year, July 2023, we get this book. So if they follow that path, then that would mean no book next year, but the next duology would start the year afterwards, so 2025? But what's interesting in all of that is that the timing on all of that, the gap year was 2021, which was the big Avatar Studios formation year. Which is like, it's kind of like, was the delay in the books because of that? Or was it just that an extra year is required to plan 2 books out? But then it's kind of like weird, because obviously like the Kyoshi books were written pre-Avatar Studios with like a different setup. I guess more direct assistance from like Mike and Brian. Brian, I suppose. Sorry, Mike specifically. Whereas the Yang Chen books have been very much probably one of the better representations of like Avatar Studios. That setup is helping put these books out. Because obviously like we're all looking for a roadmap sort of like across the board with the franchise. And this is where like it would be nice to know what's coming up next. Because to some degree, you can understand why after the Kyoshi ones, it took them a while to plan out what was next. Because when the Kyoshi books ended, they weren't called Chronicles of the Avatar. It was just a 2-book Kyoshi series. And then I guess it was popular enough that they turned it into a full-on series. So as of the Yang Chen stuff, have they planned out more heavily? Because that's the whole point of like Avatar Studios, is that apparently things are planned out more with Avatar Studios than they ever have been. So does that kind of like mean anything that they've planned this all out? Because I look at stuff like, say, this as like a really good sign that those books were so popular that they've put the Kyoshi stuff ahead of even Korra to put into the game. And that's kind of showing you that there's like a popularity, there's a focus on this. The fact that they've basically established the Roku era a little bit in the RPG. Does that mean that we're kind of fleshing it out in that way? I don't know. It's interesting. Let's see some things in chat. Weren't they a guest on the Braving the Elements podcast, the continuity guy? I think what was that? Was that when they had the 2 Avatar Studios employees on? And one of them, I think she said she was kind of like in like product development or something like that. And I think the other guy just said he was like a assistant or something like that. And like he's involved in a little bit of everything. And I think it was just that like he happened to know continuity really well and said something at a meeting that like helped or something like that. I forget the exact details of that, but I'm not sure if they necessarily clarified that like he specifically was the sort of like in Star Wars, I think they have a specific position that's like, I think it's called like Keeper of the Holocron or something like that. That is effectively continuity expert on Star Wars. And I'm assuming they have a similar position on Avatar. They probably call it like Wan Shi Tong or something like that. Or the Knowledge Seekers. I don't know. But I'm not sure if it was specifically that person. But again, they didn't clarify that much. That was a very frustrating interview to listen to, because it felt like Janet Varney and Dante Basco were terrified to ask them any questions about Avatar Studios. Like, absolutely terrified. Because, okay, I get it, you can't talk about a lot of the new stuff you're talking on, but like, they were talking about how like they're involved in like product development on like the toys and stuff like that, and they just skipped past it like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like, talk about that. That's interesting. But they didn't really. But that just shows like the secrecy still with Avatar Studios, like the amount of people that like things that we just don't know anything about. What else do we have here? Let's see. I thought he said he wanted to end with Shadow Kyoshi as Kyoshi's arc was complete and came back with Yang Chen later. Yeah, I remember that interview where he said that, because it's obviously a weird one where it's like, sure, this section of her story is complete, but like to try and say that that's the end of like Kyoshi's story when she lives to 230 years old and like we really don't have the rest of her life fleshed out is a bit of a weird statement. But I get what he was trying to say, but it just feels weird. Like, there's absolutely space to come back for more Kyoshi books if they wanted to, which is why I guess they why they are doing some sort of a Kyoshi thing in association with all this stuff. But the other thing to remember is that, and I don't know how connected or not this is, but there is a certain amount of voice acting in Generations. So the question is like, does that mean we'll get the debut of the like official voice actors for these characters on like Tuesday? Or are the potential actors for these characters separate than the ones who will be in animated content. Because, like, obviously for some of the stuff where it's like the shows from like years and years ago, they can't get those actors in to do the stuff for the game. But will it work? I don't know. That's a bit of an interesting one. Yeah, like there's an interesting point there in chat that like obviously Star Wars just had like Star Wars Celebration where they announced like all their like upcoming projects and stuff like that. And even though they didn't stream like every single one of the announcements, there were certain panels that did get screened. And it's like, obviously Avatar, we're not at that level yet, but the expectation is that we get some sort of a thing like that where they'll finally announce Avatar Studios like projects and be able to show and tease little bits and pieces. But again, as mentioned in chat as well, when we don't even have an official website yet, and this is just kind of hilarious. Let me bring this up again from the start of the podcast. When we're looking at stuff like this random book announcement, and it is potentially giving us like new information, theoretically. Probably not, but this is the kind of problem that this is either they somehow have confirmed information that this is the case for both the Netflix show and Avatar Studios, or things are in such a confused state across the board with information on Avatar and Avatar Studios, Netflix Avatar and Avatar Studios, that even official licensees are confused about what information is like official and what information is leaked. Because I think it's pretty weird in a way that this reads like Avatar News' headline from when he announced this stuff. The whole idea of like the slate, the word slate being used, and the one movie, one series thing each year, like that's not been officially said anywhere yet. Like we have like no news officially about series, apart from like literally day one of Avatar Studios being announced, them mentioning at some point we will do series and other types of content. So this is why it's like so weird. This is why we need official informational channels. Because even if I was to like say right now, bring up like official sources of information, I'm bringing up like, let's say like what one Paramount press release. I'm bringing up like news articles back from like 2021 when Avatar Studios was first announced. I'm bringing up like screenshots of like job listings from like 2 or 3 years ago, an interview on the old Paramount on the Paramount website from probably 1 or 2 years ago, and all that sort of stuff. It is not contained like all over the place like well at all. What is this book? I missed the beginning of the stream. Okay, yeah. So new book on Edelweiss, as you can see here, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Heart of a Hero. What it seems to be is a slightly longer, bigger style of book that's similar to I Am Aang. It seems to be sort of a kid's kind of picture book style thing, but obviously this one's only 24 pages. This is said to be 40. Yeah. And we have an artist on board, so it looks like there'll be new art associated with this. Based on the description, it is Aang's journey again, like it's Aang's kind of like Heart of a Hero style thing. And then this is a bit of an interesting one. Lyrical text. Now, I don't know, like, is this book being written as a song? I don't know what that necessarily like means, or is that like maybe some people who are more familiar with books like this can maybe know what that means, like lyrical books, lyrical text. I mean, but it's one of those type of books, and then it's a 2024 release as well, which is interesting. So that's interesting. And again, they specify this again, 2024, as being the, like robust TV and film content in 2024. And we're like, wait. Avatar Studios isn't like meant to start until 2025. And then it's like, wait, do they have a scoop on the Netflix show? Which rumors are saying it'll be more this year, but more recent rumors are saying it'll be next year. What are we doing? It's just a interesting situation overall. But yeah, there's that. And then, just in case anyone forgot, it's been on the schedule for years now. Paperback version of Rise of Kyoshi. Still not out yet. 2024 release. I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, by the time this comes out, some of us might have like 5 copies of this book. It's just a kind of fun thing. They don't have the Shadow of Kyoshi, but I think that is still technically a thing that's, I think, also scheduled for the same day. Just a bit of an odd situation. But yep, there's some stuff coming out that we're waiting for, but weird thing. Question in chat: what ever happened to the Kyoshi movie? So this is a complicated one because it's obviously like unconfirmed early leaked information, like from Avatar News, and he initially said that this was one of the first movies that's going to be coming out, but now it doesn't seem to even be on the schedule. Basically what happened is that, like, it's basically the difference between, he'll put up an article that is like has a couple of paragraphs of text, but his core information that article is being written on is usually only like a line or something like that. He is told like 1 or 2 tiny little pieces of information that he's trying to like put together into an actual like proper news post. And I think what basically happened here is that he had 2 or 3 little bits and pieces that he linked together of like something about an Earth avatar, combined with like this other thing and other information that's happening. And he went for like, oh, well, I guess that means like Kyoshi movie, when actually the Earth Avatar project is more actually referring to apparently the first series that Avatar Studios is going to be making, which is the Earth Avatar after Korra. Now, it has been, again, in the news that like Kyoshi stuff is happening. Now, obviously, stuff for the game is happening, but it seems like they're also casting for the roles of the Kyoshi characters for what seems like one of the big movie projects. Now, we don't know what's happening there with regards to, is there going to be Kyoshi flashbacks in the Aang movie? Is there going to be like some sort of connection between like the next Earth Avatar after Korra, and Kyoshi? Or are they doing some other Kyoshi project that we just haven't heard about at all? Basically, the idea seems to be that Kyoshi's on the table somewhere. We just don't know what sort of a project it will appear in. Now, I don't know. Maybe there's a chance that like maybe this is fully voice acted or something like that. There's absolutely the possibility that maybe it is something like that. I'd be very surprised if that was the case. But it's interesting. I don't particularly know what to make of it. I think some of the more recent pieces of news that have been put out make me kind of go like, I'm very confused about what I'm meant to view as being like actually what's happening with Avatar Studios. So again, the distinction between officially confirmed information versus not confirmed information is an important thing to address here. And how, ultimately most of the information we have is not fully official, even though behind the scenes there likely is some substance to what's happening here. But that's just the nature of kind of what's happening now, where like Avatar Studios to a certain degree is in a position where everything is on the table. Every single potential idea for a story is on the table somewhere. They're doing more Aang. There's a Korra project in there somewhere, probably. They want to do stuff with Kyoshi because Kyoshi is really, really popular. They're covering Yang Chen now in publishing. People really like Karuk now, so there's probably plans to do something there. People want more Wan content from like that early era. There's room for everything, plus also expanding into the future. Another question in chat. Are we hoping for Comic-Con news? I certainly hope so. I'm not sure though, because again, everything's now leading towards 2024. It's always getting pushed back by a year, of course. But I suppose it's getting to the point now. How much longer can they keep the sort of like Avatar Studios official radio silence going? And there's a certain point at which you just have to be like, you've dated your first movie. If you have a series coming in 2025, you're going to have to officially confirm that at some point. You have to make what's coming out soon feel real. And not just Avatar Studios to be this almost like secret mention of stuff in the background where like licensors behind the scenes seem to know what's going on, but no one knows what else is going on. So it's weird where it feels like, unfortunately, SDCC this year feels potentially a little bit too soon. But it also at the same time feels like they have to say something. But then New York Comic Con will be effectively exactly 2 years until the first movie hits. Because the New York Comic Con's in October. So October 2023 to October 2025. And that's sort of the range at which I feel like we probably should know more specifics about stuff. Stuff should feel much more concrete. Especially when you look at, say, like Star Wars and like what they announced and all this sort of stuff. Like, they're announcing like movies and projects that like won't be coming out until like 2026 or 7 or something like that. And, we're that's kind of the same, in a way, region that we're talking about here. Are they going to say anything or not? Obviously, we don't find out about what's happening at Comic-Con until, like, SDCC, until, like, the month before. So it'll still be, like, June before we know if there's a panel. And I think we'll be able to tell straight away based on, like, the way the panel is titled or not. Whereas, like, if they highlight Avatar Studios in the title, if Mike and Brian will be in attendance, you probably know they're going to say something. If they're not there, if it's titled in the same way as previous panels, there probably won't be anything. But I think they have to say something at least one of those conventions. Because I think waiting for your next big opportunity realistically is then Comic-Con 2024. It feels a bit late to be almost waiting until like kind of like just over a year until the first project hits. Just because the plan is for like 1 million projects. Because it's not just one thing where you can maybe keep that one project secret. The whole idea is you want people hyped for lots of Avatar projects. You have to say something about that. And I think they have to do it in the way that they do it for other franchises. Basically like Star Wars and Marvel do it, where they will just announce a bunch of like, we're doing this, and this. Roughly dated for here, and here. There's more information about these earlier ones. Let's see what happens. You have to say that eventually. And it's getting a bit frustrating, of course. Like, they're doing other stuff, of course, but there's also that. Like, are they going to be more upfront about what's happening with publishing? Because, yeah, we want to know what's after Yang Chen. But then with the comics, like, the comics are Dark Horse is looking a bit bad, of course, with what's happening here. Are Avatar Studios probably going to get behind the publishing and just be like, here's our plan for media and publishing? Because I don't know if Avatar is big enough to like do some sort of a giant thing where they're like, here's the Avatar, this panel, like multiple Avatar panels, including this, and this. But I'd say you can do a Avatar Studios panel and an Avatar Publishing panel. I think that's perfectly reasonable to do. And that's probably all you need. But I don't know what they're ready to do or not. Beast of the Four Nations, yes. There's a simple book where it's like, what's going on with that? When will they announce that? My collection is missing a book for a while now. What's going to happen there? And then, yeah, as mentioned in chat there, Aang's Unfreezing Day. What went wrong there? That's a bit unfortunate, but we're sort of getting back on track. Of course, you know, the Azula comic looks like a step in the right direction. Depending on what exactly the Korra comics are, whenever they announce them, they hopefully will be a step in the right direction, because I actually think Korra specifically, I think, could probably benefit from having some character specific focused books, like by doing Mako, Asami, who knows what other characters. That would work out well for them. Question in chat, are the comics good? I haven't read any of them yet. My opinion is yes. I think pretty much all of the comics are very, very good in some ways. Like, obviously, some are better than others, but in general, I think the quality of Avatar and Korra comics is pretty high compared to like other kind of like franchise tie-in comics. At least in my opinion, like especially some of the earlier ones are actually really, really strong. Like for Avatar, The Promise, The Search, The Rift, Smoke and Shadow, all stand out as being very memorable, notable to me. The other ones are good as well. Like North and South's good. I like North and South in balance. I appreciate, but you begin to kind of maybe see where like this was where it felt like they had a plan for like the first grouping of comics, and then the next grouping of comics happened, and they didn't. You never knew when they were going to get back to those stories, and that's why currently we're in a bit of a frustrating position. But all those comics are good. Like there's fantastic world building in them, and a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, like everyone will probably say, like The Search, the second Avatar comic, is the Zuko's mom story, so you kind of need to know that one at the very least. That's a huge comic, but I'd never advocate for people skipping the first one, The Promise, because I really like The Promise. I think The Promise is really good. And then The Rift probably is never quite as appreciated as it should be. I think that is a comic where like there's so much going on in that, and I think it all works together like super, super well. And I don't think there's like any obviously bad comics as such. In terms of some of the more recent output, there's maybe a little bit more to criticize. Like some of the one-shots, for instance, like the Katara comic. I enjoy it for what it is, but it could have been something so much better. Like a full Katara comic, and you know, that's all they did with it. The Toph comic was a little bit better, but still could have been a little bit more ambitious. Suki alone, I really, really liked. And you know, there's that sort of stuff. The short story collections are always a little bit like, some of them are very good, others are bad, and you kind of wonder like, why is there such a gulf between them? Who did you say your favorite Avatar was again? My favorite Avatar, like it's kind of boring, but I probably Aang. I'm just gonna go with Aang just because he's my favorite character within Avatar: The Last Airbender. And while I like a lot of the other avatars, I just really like the arc that Aang went on, and just because like I've been a fan since like day one of the show coming out, I've always had the connection to Aang. But I also really like Wan. I think they did a fantastic job with Wan as the first Avatar, and you know, I'd love to get more content with him. So probably like Aang and Wan are like my top two, but I like pretty much all the avatars. Like I discussed earlier on, I don't like the who's the worst Avatar discussion. So I have a lot of positivity for a lot of the avatars, for sure. because they're all super, super interesting. Like Korra has like an amazing arc across the various books. Like I love Korra book 2. The arc that she goes on there is to me fantastic. Roku I find super interesting and want to know more about his story. Kyoshi, we got like there was a challenge to be had there with how do you go from the presentation of Kyoshi just in ATLA to having to go back and tell the origin story of that character to get her to that point. And they did a great job at changing the character, kind of how she's viewed in a way within the fandom is so much. Very similar for Karuk, but in like almost like a even bigger way. And now with Yang Chen, like learning this whole other side about her is fantastic just by itself, as well. So it's a pretty tight grouping of characters. I think a lot of them are really strong, and in so many ways it almost comes down to like almost like whichever avatar has the most content about them is almost the one I like the most in a way. But that's just the way things are. So yeah, I suppose we're coming towards the end of the stream here. We've been going for quite a while. So I suppose this is the time for any like final questions or final things you want me to talk about here before I leave for today. Otherwise, as I've been doing this year, the plan is to do a stream every month. So there will be a stream in May at some point. It'll probably be a little later next month because I want to try and make it so that like I can talk about hopefully a preview chapter for Yang Chen if it gets released in May, which I think based on what I remember from last year, it was like towards the end of May. So I'll probably wait for that. Let's see, question here. Go to Avatar Generations character. My favorite at the moment is probably Bending Master Katara, basically Book 3 Katara, the offense-focused Katara. Just because I like that both of her attacks are like AoE, so it hits all the opponents, and I like that her advanced skill just like puts the water debuff on all characters. So I've been liking that as my main kind of like offense ultimately. It helps that I was able to recently get her up to like skill rank 6, so she's probably one of my most powerful characters. But Book 3 Katara, I'm always saying like there needs to be more merch that is Book 3 Katara, so I'm glad that they nailed the powerful Katara in the thing. Otherwise, Boomy as well is this kind of similar character for Earth, but I like the kind of how much Earth debuffs he puts out, and has a bit of a knockdown thing going on as well. So they're probably my two favorites. Otherwise, like, is there any character? Bit of an odd pick. Well, I like the Earth Kingdom soldier, the defense Earth Kingdom soldier, just because I like his basic skill, puts up barrier and stuff like that. That works pretty well, but I need to level him up a little bit more. So I definitely have some open spots on my team where like I'm definitely hoping some of the Kyoshi characters are quite good, so we can add them. Like there's definitely some potential for Tagaka, because there's a need for some different unique waterbender characters. Jonju, he could be really cool depending on how they do his skills. Heiron could also be quite interesting as like a bit of a different firebender depending on how they set her up. So there's some options here for sure. Ultimately, let's see. Question: do you think there'll be any Rava focused content? I always hope that we get like Rava covered in other stuff. Probably Korra content is where we will see Rava again. Maybe the next Earth Avatar, because it'll be only like Korra and then Rava. There's a chance for it there, but that's probably about it. Who's the most accomplished Avatar? Ooh, this is a tough one. Because obviously, like, Legends tells us that Salai is a pretty notable avatar, but we don't actually know what he did. Um, Kyoshi, of course, especially once she kind of gets past the first like 50 or so years of her era, apparently kept peace in her era for like 180 years or something like that, like give or take a few little things happening. So that's quite notable. Roku, we are told, outside of the Sozin incident, was quite active in terms of keeping peace in his era. Yang Chen, similarly so, a master diplomat. We know the legend of her is that she also does that too. Korra, of course, you have to note as well, as like she has separate villains in each of her books and like kind of comes through all of them and makes some huge moves along the way as well. If Korra can bring some sort of a peace between humans and spirits, you probably have to give it to Korra, I would say. But a lot depends on where they go with her in the content going forward. Like, is that human spirit conflict something she can resolve in her era, or is that something that will move on to the next avatar with or not? But like, she's still absolutely kind of up there. So there's a few answers to this, in that like Aang ends like a war that went on for 100 years. Like, that's, you have to note that given the circumstances he was in. Wan Wan kind of inspiring the whole idea of the avatar and kind of, you know, winning at harmonic convergence. That's like a huge event, and like what he like is attempting to do for like the first time. That's huge. Like, even to some degree, like the sacrifices that like Karuk kind of made in a way to stop the threat of dark spirits in his era, should be noted. Even though if it's a darker thing, and it's because it was so kind of like brutal in a way, it's hard to maybe overly praise it too much, but it's notable just by itself. So like there's a lot to say about like all the different avatars as far as we're aware. Even Zito, from more of the sort of like behind the desk perspective, you know, like being able to do a lot from like an official position within a government, like by just having a good relationship with like the Fire Lord and just being really good at his job, basically. That's pretty notable. So there's a case for everyone pretty much. If I could bend any element, what would I choose? I usually go for sort of like complete fantasy. Like, air's my favorite element, so I think from a creative point of view that would be it. But I often feel like, you know, earth maybe is probably one that I just feel there's a sort of a certain practicality to earth bending that I just feel could be like inherently super useful, and maybe like that would maybe match a little bit better. But you know, one of those two, the sort of like dream of airbending but maybe the reality of earthbending type thing. But you know, that's my thoughts on that. But yeah, going to wrap it up there. Like I said, there'll be a May stream. It might be a little bit later in the month, next month, because I want to try and get the Yang Chen preview chapter, if that actually comes out during the month. If it doesn't, we'll see what happens. We'll come up with some sort of a topic. Maybe some big news will hit. Maybe there'll be some Avatar Generation stuff to talk about. Maybe it can be like a Kyoshi update review. We'll see what we can do as we go forward. But let's not forget, Free Comic Book Day. Free Comic Book Day is coming up on, was it May 6th this year, I think? First Saturday in May. New Avatar story there. That is something that we can talk about, potentially. Now, does it look like it's the most in-depth story? I'm not sure, but, you know, we can maybe talk about that as well. But yeah, thanks for everyone for coming out to the stream. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for joining me, and bye.